Marvel. Skull and Bones by Swarthy Chapter 86-94. 2014. Canada, Appalachian Mountains. Hydra Preparatory Academy. Courtyard. A few moments earlier. Brock POV. Approaching the imposing gates of Hydra Preparatory Academy, I could feel the tension building in the air. Beside me, Ava and Zuru also prepared themselves for what lay ahead. I took a step forward, my muscles tensing beneath my armor, ready to smash through the gates with my formidable strength, when Zuru put his hand on my arm, signaling me to wait. "Hold on, boss," Zuru said, his mechanical voice tinged with excitement. "I've been meaning to show you what this suit can really do." Curiosity piqued, I took a step back, watching as Zuru activated one of the advanced biomechanical weapons integrated into his suit. Raising his arms towards the thick gate, I watched on in interest as the metal on his palms began to liquefy and fuse together, expanding into the long barrel of what looked like a railgun. Purple energy crackled through the air as the weapon hummed with power and a beam of destructive force shot forth, obliterating the gates in a spectacular display of power. Boom! Asterisk. Metal shrieked and sparks flew as the gates crumbled before us, reducing it to nothing more than twisted wreckage. Damn, I whistled, impressed by Zeru's growing repertoire of weaponry. The kid had come a long way since I first met him. His abilities were definitely worth the time to cultivate. With the path cleared, we moved forward, stepping over the wreckage of the shattered gates as the dust settled. I surveyed the scene around us, my eyes falling upon three figures emerging from the school's entrance. My gaze swept over them, taking in their appearance and assessing them for any potential threats. The first two were unfamiliar faces, but their weapons caught my attention. One of them carried a massive sparking warhammer, crackling with raw white electricity, while the other wielded a shield similar to Captain America's, but thicker and more mechanical in nature. HYDRA's attempts at recreating the iconic heroes were evident. And then I saw him, unmistakable even with his horrific cybernetic enhancements. John Garrett, my old combat instructor at this very school, now a twisted version of his former self. His once familiar face had been marred by cybernetics, rendering him almost unrecognizable. Wires and circuitry snaked across his scarred flesh, blending with his remaining organic tissue and creating a disturbing image. Recalling the grueling training sessions and the harsh lessons he had drilled into me, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity at the sight. Garrett had been an influential figure in my life, guiding me through the early years when I was still weak. But now, he had become a mere puppet of Hydra, transformed into a living weapon. I pushed my emotions aside and focused on the situation at hand. Assessing the three charging figures, I quickly determined that these three men didn't pose much of a threat to my group. From what I could see, they weren't even a match for me, let alone our combined skills. "Ava, Zuru," I called out, my voice steady and commanding, "I'll take the cyborg. You two handle the others." Ava nodded at my command, the eyes of her visor glowing with an affirmative response as she unsheathed the two sleek deadly blades from her wristbands. "Ah, I wanted the cyborg," Zuru said as he adjusted his stance, his suit emitting a low hum. "Could you save me a few of his parts? I want to study them later." "We'll see," I said, sounding like a father dealing with a kid who wanted a toy. Ava, utilizing her agility and lethal precision, levitated towards the bulky man wielding the sparking warhammer. Phasing out of sight just before they made contact, Zuru activated the thrusters in his suit, propelling him forward with a burst of speed. He closed the distance between himself and the shield wielder, his exosuit humming with purple energy. As those two went off, I turned my attention to my old instructor, now reduced to a shell of his former self. Charging forward, I closed the gap between us in an instant, launching a powerful crimson fist aimed at his cybernetic torso. Clang! Asterisk. My armored fist struck his torso with blinding speed. The force behind it sent him hurtling backward and crashing into a nearby school wall with a resounding clang of metal on metal. As Garrett struggled to regain his footing, I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment, witnessing how the man who had once trained me, honed my skills, and pushed me to my limits, was now barely putting up a fight. He groaned in pain as he struggled to rise from the impact, and I moved swiftly, closing in on him before he could fully recover. Standing over him, I gazed down at his battered form, a mixture of disdain and contempt welling up within me. "You've really let yourself go, Garrett," I taunted, a shred of pity creeping into my voice. Is this the best Hydra could do? A broken down cyborg. Don't talk like you fucking know me, bastard. Garrett growled, a mix of rage and humiliation in his orange mechanical eyes as he attempted to retaliate. Raising his cybernetic arm, he unleashed a small barrage of energy blasts toward me, but they were no match for my armor, dissipating harmlessly off the dark plates as they made contact. Damn, Hydra must be struggling, I mused aloud, as I glanced down at my unmarked armor and back up at him. Even the kid's blasts aren't that weak. Garrett looked up at me, his cybernetic eyes glowing with a hint of fear as he saw his attack do nothing to me. Who are you? He asked through gritted teeth. I smirked at his question as I again closed the distance between us. Don't tell me you really don't recognize me anymore, coach, I stated mockingly as I crouched down so that we were at eye level. And here I thought I was your favorite student. Garrett growled in frustration, his cybernetic fist charging up with energy once again as he attempted to raise it towards my faceplate, but I deflected it easily with a casual swipe of my arm, slapping his cybernetic fist away like an annoying fly. The force behind my deflection was enough to cause his fragile limb to crumble under the sheer strength of my strike, leaving him even more defenseless. Are you gonna put up a fight? Or just sit there and bleed? I questioned with a hint of disappointment. You used to be better than this. What happened to the fierce warrior who trained us to be killers? Is this all you've become? Garrett's eyes widened, his fear growing more palpable by the second. It was clear that my presence, coupled with the display of my skills, had shattered whatever delusions of grandeur he might have had. With a swift and fluid motion, I closed the few inches of distance between us and delivered a devastating kick strike to Garrett's midsection. Clang! Asterisk. The impact reverberated through his cybernetic frame, eliciting a pained groan from him as he was sent hurling into the side of another wall, debris scattering around him and littering the courtyard of the school. Erog! Garrett cried as he was implanted into the thick bricks, clutching his abdomen as small sparks began to flicker in his circuitry. I approached him slowly, my footsteps echoing through the courtyard. Bending down, I grabbed him by the collar, lifting him up out of the demolished bricks with ease. You're not the soldier you used to be, I sneered, my grip tightening. Just another pathetic pawn. Garrett's eyes met mine, a mixture of pain, anger, and a hint of regret lingering within them. Maybe you're right, he muttered, his voice strained. But, even if you kill me, don't think, for a second, that they won't just rebuild something stronger. I chuckled darkly, the sound reverberating through the air as I turned my head away from the broken toy soldier and looked around at the empty grounds. The school, it seems empty, Garrett. No students, no staff. Did Hydra abandon you here? Left behind like a discarded toy to guard an empty husk. I tightened my grip, feeling satisfaction as his struggles weakened. Garrett tried to raise his remaining hand towards me to fire his weapon, but I swiftly grabbed his wrist, my strength overpowering his feeble attempt at resistance. With a twist of my hand, I literally disarmed him by ripping the cybernetic from his shoulder socket and tossing it aside. Eraga! Garrett screeched in pain as his metal arm clattered against the ground. His face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation as he glared at me. But it was futile. The cybernetic enhancements may have given him some small semblance of strength, but they couldn't protect him from the brutal reality of the current situation. In the face of true power, he was nothing more than a pathetic pawn, a relic of a failed experiment. I released my grip, letting Garrett's body crumple to the ground, defeated and broken. Turning away from his prone form, I glanced over at Ava and Zuru, who were effortlessly dispatching their opponents as well. Ava, agile and lethal, moved with uncanny grace and precision as she engaged her opponent, the bulky man wielding the electrified warhammer. Utilizing her enhanced speed and agility, she deftly avoided his heavy swings and strikes. With each movement, she seemed to dance around him, her blades a deadly extension of her body. The massive Hydra soldier swung his warhammer wildly, but his strikes met nothing but thin air as Ava effortlessly evaded them. Moving with deadly precision, Ava phased in and out of visibility, her blades slicing through the air and leaving trails of crimson as they met flesh. The enemy cried out in pain as deep lacerations appeared on his body, blood pouring from the wounds. With each dodge, she left deep, precise cuts on her opponent's body. The man roared in frustration and pain, unable to anticipate Ava's movements or defend against her ghostly onslaught. Blood poured from the numerous deep cuts and stabs on his body, evidence of Ava's lethal skill. He swung the electrified warhammer with desperation, but Ava's intangibility allowed her to pass right through the massive weapon, denying him any chance to land a hit. As the fight continued, the man's body became a canvas of deep gashes and lacerations. Blood poured from his wounds, staining his attire crimson. Yet, despite the visible agony, he stubbornly pressed on, his determination unyielding. Ava's attacks became more relentless, her strikes a blur as she exploited every opening. The dance between them intensified, reaching a crescendo of lethal grace. Finally, with a swift and precise movement, Ava solidified and appeared directly behind her wounded adversary. Before he could react, she delivered a swift and precise barrage, severing the tendons in each of his muscular limbs like a butcher and leaving him crumpled on the ground, heavily bleeding. Meanwhile, Zeru's opponent, the shield-wielding soldier, found himself trapped in a technological onslaught. The Hydra soldier, now disarmed of his shield, was desperately running around the courtyard, trying to defend himself from Zeru's drone as it relentlessly pursued the soldier, firing purple blasts of searing energy, roasting his flesh, and reducing his armor to mere slag. As the fight was going on, I glanced over to Zeru, who was seated off to the side of the battlefield, eyes gleaming with curiosity and excitement. His opponent's discarded shield was in his lap as he studied the mechanics of it, his suit processing the data and analyzing its construction, searching for weaknesses and potential applications. With a final surge of energy, the drone unleashed a devastating blast, engulfing the soldier in a blaze of searing plasma. The air filled with the acrid scent of burnt metal and flesh. Zeru glanced up from his project and watched, the eyes of his helmet glowing with a mixture of fascination and detachment, as his opponent writhed and screamed in agony, unable to withstand the onslaught. Satisfied with the fight, Zeru deactivated the drone and stood up to approach the smoldering figure on the ground, his helmet emitting a soft hum as his eyes scanned the soldier's melting flesh, likely cataloging the modifications of his structure and seeking any valuable information. Though the soldier's resistance had been futile, Zeru's focus seemed to remain on the knowledge he could gain from the encounter. He was driven by a relentless thirst for understanding, a desire to unravel the secrets of the enemy and utilize them to his advantage. Together, Ava and Zeru had effortlessly overcome their opponents, their skills and powers showcasing the culmination of their training and growth. The courtyard was now silent, save for the pained moans of the defeated, as my team regrouped around me, the three of us standing victorious amidst the aftermath of the one-sided battles. "We make a hell of a team," Ava remarked, shaking off a few specks of blood from her blades. I nodded in agreement, a sense of satisfaction coursing through me. "These guys weren't much of a challenge to begin with," I said in a derisive tone. "Hydra has really let their standards slip. And their tech is so outdated. I could probably build something 10 times better in my sleep." Zeru chimed in, his suit emitting a low hum as he bent down to examine Garrett's broken and bleeding body. As he worked, I focused on the other 2 groaning Hydra soldiers. They were barely conscious, their bodies damaged and defeated. "Let's move them inside," I said, my voice firm and decisive. "We need some answers, and these 3 seem to be the only ones left here." Ava nodded, her visor glinting in the dim light. "I'll investigate the building, make sure there's no one else lurking around." I nodded at her suggestion and she made her way toward the school entrance, disappearing into the shadows, her stealth abilities and expertise ensuring she remained undetected. Once she left, Zeru and I dragged the wounded and groaning Hydra soldiers into the school. Canada, Appalachian Mountains. Hydra Preparatory Academy. The school was eerily silent, its abandoned corridors echoing our footsteps. The absence of life only deepened the mystery of why Hydra had left this place behind. Reaching a secluded classroom, I gestured for Zeru to bring the wounded Hydra soldiers inside and we deposited them onto the cold floor. As the groaning soldiers lay there, their faces contorted in pain, I towered over them, my presence imposing and unyielding. The hammer and shield wielders, still writhing in pain, seemed oblivious to their surroundings, their minds seemingly trapped in a state of pain-induced delirium. It was clear that their injuries and defeat had taken a toll on their mental faculties. The hammer wielder lay sprawled on the floor, groaning and muttering to himself. He swung his limp arms weakly, his strikes missing their mark as he blindly attempted to defend himself from imaginary threats. The shield wielder, on the other hand, sat against the wall, his melted face scorched and bloody. His eyes darted erratically as if he were trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. He clutched his damaged flesh tightly, muttering unintelligibly. I approached them cautiously, the echoes of my footsteps reverberating through the room. Their presence served as a grim reminder of the brutality of our battle against Hydra. Now, gentlemen, I began, my voice dripping with menace. I have some questions, and I suggest you start talking if you want to avoid further pain. But my words fell on deaf ears. Their responses were nonsensical, mere echoes of pain and confusion. Frustration gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. These soldiers were nothing more than broken shells, their minds shattered by the chaos of battle and the weight of their injuries. Extracting information from them in their current state seemed pointless. But Garrett, still heavily sparking and weak, struggled to sit up, his eyes darting between Zuru and me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. I could see the frustration and helplessness etched on his face. Zuru, focused and methodical, walked over to the old cyborg and crouched down beside him. The glow of his visor intensified as he activated a scanning feature in his suit, assessing the extent of the cybernetic modifications that had been forced upon Garrett. "Boss, I could just hack into this one's brain and extract the information we need," Zuru suggested, his voice laced with a hint of excitement. "But it won't be a pleasant experience for him. The neural implants Hydra has embedded in his new brain are designed to resist any attempts at tampering, so it might break him completely." Garrett's eyes widened, his expression pleading as he looked at me. "No, please," he begged, his voice filled with desperation. "I've already been through enough pain. I can't take any more." I turned my gaze away from Garrett, dismissing his pleas as if they were nothing more than background noise. "Let me know when you're done, Zuru," I said, my voice cold and detached. "We need to find out what happened here." Zuru nodded, his focus fully on the task at hand. He began the intricate process of hacking into Garrett's cybernetic implants, his fingers flying across a holographic interface projected from his suit. The room filled with the hum of technological activity and Garrett's agonizing screams, as Zuru delved into Garrett's head, searching for the information we needed. As I walked away from the scene, leaving Garrett to his fate, I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. The man I had once admired and respected as a mentor now lay broken and defeated. But I knew that extracting the information from him was crucial, and no amount of sentimentality could change that. Ava rejoined us, her footsteps barely making a sound as she entered the room. Her visor concealed her expression, but her body language spoke of readiness and alertness. "Any sign of other Hydra operatives?" I asked, my voice low. Ava shook her head. "The building is deserted. No sign of anyone else. It's like they cleared out in a hurry." I nodded, processing the information. The emptiness of the school raised more questions than it answered. What had Hydra done with all the students, and why had they abandoned their own facility? As Zuru continued his work, his expression focused and determined, I turned my attention to the wounded Hydra soldiers lying on the floor off to the side. Despite their defeat, they still posed a potential threat, their loyalty to Hydra unwavering. "Kill them," I instructed Ava, gesturing toward the unconscious soldiers. Ava nodded, her blades glinting in the dim light as she moved to carry out my orders without hesitation. With swift and precise movements, she swiftly ended the suffering of the incapacitated soldiers, severing their vital arteries with calculated strikes. Blood pooled around their lifeless bodies, staining the cold floor of the room. Their bodies fell limp to the ground, joining the defeated form of Garrett, who continued to endure the excruciating pain of Zeru's interrogation. As I watched Ava complete her task, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Zeru's focused work and Garrett's tortured cries. Zeru's voice broke the silence, drawing my attention away from the grim scene. "Boss, I've got what we need," he announced, his mechanical voice tinged with excitement. "Seems like Hydra discontinued the school program here a few years ago. They've transferred all the students to a top-secret Hydra research base in Sokovia." "Sokovia," I repeated, a flicker of recognition crossing my mind. Zuru nodded, his next words confirming my suspicion. From his memories, it looks like the two high-ranking faculty members, Dr. Whithall and General Hale, took the students there to use them as subjects in their weapons research. It's a high-security facility. A sense of irritation surged through me at hearing those names. Dr. Whithall and General Hale were the targets of this mission, and if they were in Sokovia, then that's where we needed to be. So, they took the students to Sokovia to use them as guinea pigs and turn them into weapons, I muttered, my voice filled with disdain. Zuru nodded, his face serious behind the helmet. Exactly. It seems Hydra had bigger plans for the students than just training them. They want to make them into their own personal superhuman army. Did you get the exact location of this base? I asked. Zuru shook his head. Not precisely, he admitted. But I was able to get a few rough coordinates that should make finding it much easier for us. Let's go, I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for doubt. We're heading to Sokovia. Ava and Zuru nodded in agreement, their determination evident in their glowing eyes. As the three of us left the school building and started to make our way through the courtyard, a thought flashed through my mind, as if something was left unfinished. I paused, turning back to face the decimated courtyard of the Hydra Preparatory Academy, the place that had once been a training ground for young soldiers. A sinister smile crept across my face, and I unhinged the skeletal mouth of my faceplate, revealing the furnace of destructive energy contained within. With a guttural howl, a torrent of crimson energy surged forth from my mouth, forming a concentrated beam of raw power. Without a second thought, I swung the beam around in a wide arc, unleashing a devastating onslaught that encompassed the entire school grounds. The destructive energy tore through the thick stone bricks of the building, reducing them to rubble and ash. The beam tore through walls and structures, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. The sound of crumbling concrete and metal echoed through the air as the school was reduced to ruins. The once imposing Hydra Preparatory Academy was now nothing more than a pile of scorched debris, a symbol of the destruction we had brought upon it. Satisfied with the obliteration of Hydra's presence in this place, I closed the skeletal mouth of my faceplate, sealing away the destructive power. As the echoes of destruction faded, the three of us turned away from the smoldering remains of the school and walked away from the scene, the setting sun casting long shadows as it dipped below the horizon. 2014. Washington, D.C. The next morning. Omniscient POV. Meanwhile, as Brock and his team made their way to Sokovia, Captain America, Black Widow, and Falcon continued their mission to stop Project Insight in the heart of Washington, D.C. During their investigation, they had discovered Camp Lehigh, an abandoned training facility from World War II, and stumbled upon the preserved consciousness of Arnim Zola, now in the form of an AI. After a tense conversation with Zola, they learned about the algorithm, a program designed to identify targets for Hydra by analyzing people's private data online. The algorithm predicted threats to Hydra's organization based on this data, both present and future. Armed with this newfound knowledge, the trio formulated a plan. They would kidnap a high-ranking Hydra member masquerading as a SHIELD agent and use them to gain access to one of the new helicouriers. Their goal was to reach the terminal where Steve would use the device he had been given by Brock, which was supposedly capable of shutting down all of Project Insight's systems. But before they could act, they had to pick their target. Sidwell is our best chance to get inside the Hydra operation, Natasha stated, her voice filled with conviction. We know Pierce is sitting on top of the most secure building in the world, but Sidwell is the next best option. Steve nodded in agreement, his blue eyes reflecting his determination. If we can get to Sidwell, we can use him to gain access to the helicourier and shut down Project Insight from the inside. He voiced. That's a good plan, Sam Wilson chimed in, his voice eager and excited. But how exactly are we supposed to locate this guy? I mean, he must be held up somewhere secure, right? We don't have time to search all over DC. Natasha smiled. Let me worry about that, she replied, her voice playful. I'll find him. Natasha tapped into the few remaining trusted contacts she had within SHIELD, and through those sources, she discovered that Jasper Sidwell would be meeting with a senator at a high-end hotel restaurant in Washington, D.C. tomorrow evening. And so, with their target's location identified, the trio of heroes gathered in Sam's small apartment to formulate their plan of action. Washington, D.C. Hay Adams Hotel. The next day. The following morning, the team positioned themselves strategically near the hotel restaurant, with a view of the designated location, and waited for their target. Captain America, his shield discreetly concealed beneath his clothes, blended in with the crowd, keeping a watchful eye on the entrance. Black Widow, dressed in an elegant disguise, positioned herself near the restaurant's exit, ready to intercept Sidwell as he made his way out. Her keen stealth skills would ensure they wouldn't miss their target. Falcon, perched on a nearby rooftop, scanned the surroundings with the enhanced vision in his goggles. His metal wings fluttered slightly as he adjusted his position, ready to launch into action at a moment's notice. Time seemed to stretch as they watched the minutes tick by, their eyes trained on the entrance of the hotel. Finally, the moment arrived as a convoy of 5 black SUVs pulled in front of the building and Sidwell emerged from one of the vehicles, accompanied by his security detail, the senator, and a few aides. All of them wore dark-colored suits and ties that were typical to the upper echelons of the American government. As the team watched, the group entered the busy hotel and made their way through the lobby toward the restaurant connected to the building. Captain America's gaze sharpened as he observed Sidwell, his eyes tracing the man's every movement. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing upon him, the fate of countless lives hanging in the balance. "There they are," Cap whispered over the comms, his voice hushed. "Get ready." Black Widow's senses heightened, her body poised like a coiled serpent ready to strike. And Falcon adjusted his goggles, his fingers tapping restlessly against the edge of the rooftop. The atmosphere grew tense as the minutes passed, anticipation hanging in the air like a heavy cloak, as the bustling sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background, their focus solely on the glass windows of the restaurant, where they had a good viewpoint of Sidwell's party. Inside the restaurant, the meeting progressed, oblivious to the approaching storm. Glasses clinked, voices murmured, and the aroma of fine cuisine filled the room, creating a backdrop of sophistication and opulence. Finally, the meeting concluded, and the senator and his aides bid Sidwell farewell as the Hydra operative stood up and moved with purpose, his demeanor exuding confidence as he made his way toward the restaurant's exit, flanked by his security detail. Just as Sidwell stepped fully out of the hotel, the trio of heroes sprang into action with impeccable coordination and efficiency. Captain America and Black Widow swiftly neutralized Sidwell's security, incapacitating them with precise strikes and well-timed moves, leaving them unconscious on the ground. Sidwell froze in his tracks, a mix of recognition and fear flickering across his face as he locked eyes with the two Avengers, his mind racing as he knew the level of danger he was currently in. Without wasting a moment, Sidwell turned on his heels and tried to escape, his heart pounding with panic. But before he could take a single step, Falcon swooped down from the sky with impressive speed and precision. His mechanical wings glided gracefully as he grabbed hold of Sidwell, securing him in a tight grip and effortlessly lifting him off the ground and soaring into the air, leaving Cap and Widow to finish off the remaining security. Cap and Widow quickly closed in on the scene, finishing up their own tasks efficiently, and regrouped to follow from the ground. The trio wasted no time, taking Sidwell to a secluded location where they could interrogate him about Project Insight and the names of those involved. Within the confines of the safe house, the atmosphere grew tense. Sidwell sat bound to a chair, his expression a mix of defiance and trepidation. The trio of heroes stood before him, their eyes piercing and unwavering. "Steve," his voice steady but tinged with worry, broke the silence. "Tell us everything you know about Herta and their plan." Sidwell hesitated, sweat plastering his bald head as a battle raged within him. The fear of Hydra's retribution warred with the knowledge that his life was in immediate danger if he didn't comply. Seeing the traitor's inner turmoil, Black Widow stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of determination and ruthlessness. She raised her fist, ready to strike, and without hesitation, delivered a swift blow to Sidwell's face. The impact echoed through the room, causing Sidwell to gasp in pain. Blood trickled from his split lip as he desperately tried to catch his breath. Black Widow reached back to hit him again when Sidwell suddenly called out for her to stop. "I'll tell you everything," he gasped, his voice hoarse. Just don't hurt me." Widow took a step back, a smug smile playing at the corners of her lips. "That was easy," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. As Sidwell began to divulge the information, his voice quivered with a mixture of fear and desperation. He revealed the full plan of Project Insight and the full depth of Hydra's infiltration and corruption within SHIELD at the highest levels, including the involvement of Alexander Pierce, the man who had orchestrated this whole operation. As Steve listened, a mix of anger and despair washed over him. The corruption ran deeper than he had ever imagined. He couldn't help but wonder how many lives had been lost or ruined because of Hydra's influence. Amidst the revelations, Sidwell began to chuckle, a sinister sound that sent shivers down the heroes' spines. What's so funny? Falcon questioned as Black Widow moved up to the man. Widow, not one to tolerate insolence, delivered a swift punch to Sidwell's gut, silencing his laughter. Through gritted teeth, Sidwell managed to speak, his voice dripping with smugness. You think Project Insight ends with the helicarriers? That's just the beginning. Guns in the sky are a good deterrent, but we still need boots on the ground to keep the peace. What are you talking about? Black Widow questioned, her fist rising to strike the man again. Sidwell flinched at the motion and continued, Hydra has a whole army waiting in the wings. And they're ready to be unleashed. Steve's worry grew, his mind racing with the implications of Sidwell's words. He had to know more. Where is this army being kept? Sidwell's face twisted into a smirk. I don't have that information. Only the highest-ranking members of Hydra know the location. And they won't be easy to find. Steve's frustration boiled over, and he grabbed Sidwell by the collar, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. You have to give me something, Sidwell. We need to stop this. Sidwell's bloody smirk widened. I can give you one clue. Sokovia. That's all I know. In the wake of Sidwell's revelation, a heavy silence settled in the room, broken only by the sound of Sidwell's labored breathing. The trio of heroes exchanged grim looks, realizing the magnitude of the threat they were facing. As they processed the information, they knew their mission had become even more urgent. With the weight of the world on their shoulders, the trio knew that time was running out, and that they need to move fast if they wanted to put a stop to Hydra's sinister plans. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Deep within the forest of Sokovia, hidden beneath the towering trees and thick vegetation, stood the heavily fortified Hydra Research Base. The building itself was a massive structure, constructed with sleek dark stone and imposing in its sheer size and presence. It seemed to exude an aura of power and malevolence, serving as a chilling reminder of the evil that went on within. The base was surrounded by a formidable energy shield that crackled with electric blue energy, a barrier designed to keep intruders at bay. Turrets equipped with Chidori energy blasters lined the perimeter, ready to unleash their deadly firepower at a moment's notice. The Hydra battalion patrolling the base added to the sense of foreboding, their movements unnatural and robotic, as if they were mere puppets controlled by an unseen hand. They were equipped with Chidori cannons, machine guns, tanks, trucks, and jetpacks and moved with unsettling precision, their every movement calculated and devoid of emotion. The surrounding forest was fortified with watchtowers and bunkers, adding to the sense of impenetrability that the base exuded, turning the surrounding wilderness into a formidable obstacle for any intruders. Inside the Hydra Research Base, a labyrinthine structure of twisted corridors and high-security doors, Dr. Werner Reinhardt, known to his colleagues as Dr. Whitehall, stood in a dimly lit lab. His cold gaze was fixated on one of his many specimens, a silver-haired young man lying on an operating table. The man's body was covered in strange markings, evidence of the twisted experiments he had undergone at the hands of Dr. Whitehall. As the doctor meticulously worked on the specimen, his mind focused solely on his cruel pursuits. General Hale entered the lab. Her presence was commanding, but there was a weariness in her eyes that she tried to hide. "Drive Whitehall," she said, her voice authoritative. "Secretary Pierce has sent word. We need to prepare to move the army." Dr. Whitehall looked up from his work, an annoyed sigh escaping his lips. "Can you not see I'm a little busy at the moment?" Hale ignored the doctor's words and glanced at the body on the operating table, her expression momentarily showing a glimpse of sorrow before regaining her composure. "You weren't supposed to be meddling with the twins. They were meant to be a gift for the five heads, not your personal playthings." Dr. Whitehall's face remained unchanged as he responded, "The twins showed great potential, I couldn't resist the temptation of exploring their abilities further. Besides, it's just the boy." Hale's eyes narrowed, a hint of frustration in her voice. "Tighten up. You know we can't afford any mistakes right now. Hydra is expecting results." The doctor let out a sigh, setting his tools aside. Yes, of course. But I can't help but feel a pang of disappointment. After they leave, I won't have any more test subjects to work on." He turned to General Hale, his cold gaze fixating on her. "That reminds me, how is your daughter doing? Is she showing any signs of rejection after the operation?" Hale's face showed a brief look of sadness at his words, which Dr. Whitehall noticed, before becoming impassive once again. "She's doing fine. She's recovering well. she said stiffly. Dr. Whitehall nodded dispassionately at her answer before turning back to the body he was currently experimenting on. His mind was already moving on to the next stage of his plans. Hale watched him for a moment before turning to leave the lab. "Just make sure you're ready to move the army when Secretary Pierce gives the word," she commanded. Dr. Whitehall simply nodded, his focus already back on his cruel experiments. As General Hale left the lab, he returned to his work, his heart devoid of any empathy or remorse. His wicked smile grew wider as he moved swiftly, gently cutting off the top of the young man's skull and exposing his brain. With practiced precision, he attached a metal helmet-like device over the missing portion of the head, the device latching onto the exposed brain with an ominous click. Lines of text began running on a holographic display attached to the table, indicating the successful connection between the device and the young man's brain. The doctor's excitement was palpable as he celebrated his genius work. His dark eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched the data streaming on the holographic display. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Whitehall murmured to himself, his voice filled with a maniacal glee. "If I could just get my hands on the girl as well." Boom. Asterisk. But before Whitehall could fully relish his triumph, a sudden thundering crash reverberated throughout the compound, followed by a small earthquake that shook the very stones of the building, sending bits of dust cascading through the air. Dr. Whitehall stumbled, nearly losing his balance as the ground trembled beneath his feet. The smile on his face faltered, replaced by a mix of confusion and alarm. "What in the world?" he muttered, glancing around the lab in search of an explanation. The base's alarms blared, indicating an imminent threat. The Hydra troops outside the lab rushed to their positions, their robotic movements intensified by their alert status. Dr. Whitehall's heart pounded in his chest as he quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The compound was under attack. Someone had breached their defenses, and the security he had put in place was being put to the test. In the chaos that ensued, the young man on the operating table remained motionless, the holographic display still flickering with lines of code, oblivious to the impending danger. As the earthquake subsided, Dr. Whitehall's mind raced with possibilities. Who could have infiltrated their base, and how had they managed to bypass the energy shield? He glanced at the young man on the table, his creation, and then back at the holographic display. Despite the looming threat, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his accomplishment. "Well, I needed something to evaluate your capabilities on," Dr. Whitehall murmured with a smile. "Looks like someone's offered me the perfect chance to do exactly that." He stepped away from the table, intent on finishing what he'd started. "Eyes open, little man," he commanded, his tone filled with anticipation as he went to pick up a small remote. "Time to make yourself useful." 2014. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. A few moments earlier. Brock POV. In the cockpit of the cloaked hovercar hovering high above the imposing Hydra Research Base in Sokovia, I sat alongside my two trusted subordinates, Ava and Zuru, as I fix my eyes on the base below us. "This place's security is no joke," Zuru said, his voice holding a note of awe as he looked over the scans of the compound. "Force field, alien tech weaponry, they really don't want anyone getting in or out. Hydra must have paid a pretty penny to build this kind of setup," Ava noted, her eyes scanning the perimeter of the base. I nodded, my mind racing as I surveyed the base below. The force field shimmered with an otherworldly blue glow, pulsating with power. The alien tech turrets, sleek and deadly, lined the walls, ready to unleash their destructive energy on any intruder. It was a fortress, seemingly impenetrable. I took a moment to think, weighing our options carefully. We needed to act fast, and every move had to be precise. After a moment of silence, I finally spoke, my voice determined and focused. "All right, here's the plan. I'll go in first and act as a distraction. While the guards are focused on me, Zuru, you locate the central control room and breach the security system. I want full control of the base's automated systems. Ava, you'll be our eyes and ears inside the base, gathering intelligence and eliminating any opposition you encounter." Ava and Zuru both nodded in agreement at the plan, their eyes reflecting the same determination I felt within me. "Both of you stay in communication at all times. If you locate either of the targets, keep them alive. I want to finish them myself," I ordered. My two companions exchanged looks of understanding. "Understood," they answered in unison. I shot each of them one last glance, making sure they were ready to take action, before I opened the door of the cloaked hovercar, allowing the cool night air to fill the vehicle. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I prepared myself for action, my heart pounding with anticipation at the battle ahead. Without any further words, I leapt from the hovercar, falling down through the starry sky like a comet plummeting toward the compound below. As I fell, inky black liquid began to seep from my skin as the dark metal plates of my armor settled in place, enveloping my body. A crimson haze filled my vision as my skeletal helmet locked tightly around my head, completing my transformation and providing the protection I needed for the upcoming battle. Hurtling down through the air in the heavy armor, my momentum increased rapidly and a crimson-red force field began to flicker around me as I neared the blue energy barriers surrounding the base. Boom! The impact was explosive, and a loud thundering shockwave reverberated through the air as the crimson force field around me collided with the blue force field protecting the base. The air whirred with the crackling of static electricity as the two opposing forces attempted to push against each other, neither yielding to the other. But the conflict lasted only a few seconds before the crimson force around me broke through the barrier, shattering it with sheer power. The explosion was deafening, and shockwaves traveled across the entire compound as I crashed through the barrier and collided with the ground in the courtyard of the base, creating a massive crater that shook the very foundation of the structure and sent dust and debris to fill the air. The ground continued to tremble slightly beneath my feet as I rose from the rubble, my armor gleaming ominously in the moonlight as the dust began to settle. Hydra's soldiers rushed to the scene, their weapons raised and their faces etched with surprise and fear as they gazed upon my armored form. Without asking questions, they began to open fire and, with a deep, guttural growl, I charged forward, my crimson force field deflecting all the alien tech blasts that came my way. Like an unleashed demon, I plowed through the enemy line, my attacks causing them to fall in droves as blood and organs began to soak the battlefield. "Take him down! Fire! Fire!" One of the enemy captains yelled, his voice filled with desperation. But their attempts were futile. With each swing of my powerful armored claws and fists, I sent soldiers flying across the courtyard, crashing into the walls of the compound with bone-crunching impacts. Each of my blows struck true, and I reveled in the frenzy of battle, my senses heightened like a drug addict who'd found his rush. A barrage of energy continued to rain down from the walls, and 4 wide streams of blue energy erupted from the enemy line as more soldiers fired at me with their Chidori cannons, but the blasts never reached my charging form. Instead, the beams of energy reflected off the red force field protecting me, and struck their allies surrounding me, tearing through their flesh and destroying their ranks even further. The battle became brutal, and it filled the air with the sounds of energy blasts, metal clashing, and the grunts of soldiers fighting for their lives. As I cut through the mass of enemies, I noticed Ava and Zuru spring into action, making use of the chaos I created to infiltrate the base undetected. Ava's abilities allowed her to slip through the confusion of the battle like a shadow in the night, taking down guards silently and swiftly as she moved, while Zeru's tech prowess enabled him to bypass the base's intricate security systems with ease. One by one, I took down the Hydra soldiers, their advanced weapons proving no match for my defenses. They fell like dominoes, unable to withstand the onslaught of power I unleashed upon them. With each opponent I took down, I grew more confident and more powerful. The dark power of Sidorak coursed through my veins, fueling my rage and boosting my abilities. My strikes became even more devastating, and with each death, I could practically feel the mounting fear in the Hydra soldiers' minds as they realized the magnitude of the threat they faced. But despite my overwhelming advantage, the fight was far from over as even more soldiers poured out from the inside of the compound, surrounding me as I battled my way through their ranks. Their numbers were growing, and it was clear to see that they had enhanced these new troops with some abilities of their own, giving them a modicum of power. Various methods of attack emerged from the pack, and soon I found myself facing small bursts of fire and lightning shot from hands, melee weapons wielded by soldiers with enhanced strength, and even a weak telekinetic pull that tried to yank me off my feet. But with each new superpowered opponent that appeared, my exhilaration from the battle only intensified. Their weak abilities proved no match for the sheer power I wielded, and with every kill, I felt that dark sense of intoxication rippling through my veins as the destruction I was wreaking fueled my abilities even further. Ha 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 ha. I laughed, the sound echoing eerily through the courtyard, as I mercilessly decimated the enhanced Hydra forces. Blood splattered on my armor as I delivered blow after blow, the air filled with the screams of the fallen, the shouts of the enemy, and the thuds of bodies hitting the ground. My mind was filled with nothing but the fight, the thrill of battle, and the destruction of my enemies. It was euphoric, and it made me even more eager for more. The reinforcements didn't even slow me down as I struck them down one after another. Their numbers dwindled, and the few survivors who were left standing began to retreat inside the base, seeking shelter from the unstoppable force that had descended upon them. I allowed them to flee into the building, a wicked grin forming on my skeletal faceplate as I watched them scramble for a semblance of safety. But any who tried to leave the walls of the compound met the same fate as their fallen comrades. Before long, I stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by a sea of corpses that littered the now blood-soaked stone. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the carnage, turning the once orderly and pristine compound into a scene straight out of a horror movie. The air was thick with the stench of blood and the lingering scent of destruction. With my dark armor reflecting the moonlight, I shook the blood from my gauntlets, my heart still pounding with exhilaration from the battle. My glowing, crimson eyes glinted in the night, and I glanced down at my hands, relishing the sight of the dried blood crusted on the claws on my gauntlet-covered fingers. Without hesitation, I stomped through the mass of corpses, their lifeless forms a testament to the havoc I had wrought. Each step echoed through the courtyard, the squelchy sound of victory resonating in my ears as leftover bones and guts were crushed beneath my feet. As I made my way into the base, a chilling silence fell upon the once bustling compound. The hallways were empty, the soldiers retreating to the deepest corners of the facility to escape my wrath. With my skeletal faceplate twisted into a cruel smile, I continued my relentless advance, my dark armor soaked in the blood of my enemies. I moved forward with purpose, examining the base for any sign of the targets I sought. The base was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, but the halls were quiet, save for the blaring alarms, and the distant sound of gunfire still echoing from somewhere deep within the complex. On my way, I encountered more Hydra soldiers, but I was relentless. Tearing through them with ruthless precision. I could hear the panicked whispers of the surviving soldiers as they cowered in the shadows, their bravado shattered by the sight of their fallen comrades and the monster that was currently tearing through their base. Status report, I called over the comms as I continued moving down the corridors, listening for any sounds of life. I've breached the main control room and I have full control of their systems, Zuru spoke through the earpiece. The base is secure. No one will get in or out without my authorization. I nodded in satisfaction, continuing my search for the targets I knew must be somewhere inside the base. Good work, Zuru. Ava, any news? I asked. I'm currently in what looks like some sort of medical bay, and have eyes on one of the targets. Ava's voice sounded hushed, as if she were whispering into the microphone of her helmet. Which one? I asked. The general, she replied. But she's not alone. A weird-looking young woman is following her around. She's definitely enhanced by the looks of it. My interest piqued, I paused for a moment and considered my options. Zuru, have you seen any signs of the other target yet? I asked. No, not yet, he responded. Still searching for him on the camera feeds. All right, let me know when you have his location. Ava, send me your position, I ordered. Copy that, boss, she said, and I began to make my way deeper into the base. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base, Medical Bay. Omniscient POV. General Hale's mind was in chaos as she hurried through the labyrinthine corridors of the Hydra Research Base, her heart pounding with fear and anger. She could hear the sounds of chaos outside the walls, the deafening screams and gunfire telling her that something terrible was happening. Behind her, levitating a few inches off the floor, was a young woman with strange eyes and unnatural features. The girl appeared to be in her late teens, with cropped blonde hair and skin the color of polished steel. Her eyes were mismatched, one green and the other a glowing pale blue. If Brock were here, he would probably barely recognize this girl as the same one he went to school with, given how much alteration had been done to her appearance. Ruby Hale glided effortlessly behind her mother, keeping pace with her as they moved out of the medical bay, where she had, only a few minutes ago, been locked up in one of the stasis chambers for an unknown period of time. A look of confusion and concern was etched on her young face. Ruby had been through a lot since leaving the academy and being forced by her mother to undergo one of Hydra's many superhuman experiments, but General Hale was determined to keep her safe, no matter what. "What's happening, Mom?" Ruby cried out, reaching out to clutch the General's hand tightly like she did when she was a little girl. General Hale glanced back at the young woman, a sad smile touching her lips. She reached out and squeezed the young girl's hand reassuringly. The experiment had given Ruby the amazing powers of gravity manipulation, but that hadn't come without cost. Her appearance, as well as her mind, had been altered beyond recognition. In fact, Hale wasn't even sure if the girl before her was even truly her daughter anymore, as she acted so different than the young woman she'd once known. But that didn't mean she wasn't still her child, though. "We need to find a safe place, Ruby," the general replied, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Stay close to me and do exactly as I say, okay?" Ruby nodded, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity as she followed her mother through the dimly lit hallways. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with one of the enhanced Hydra soldiers, his eyes glowing faintly with power. "General Hale, I've been ordered to protect you at all costs," the soldier spoke with a cold, monotone voice. Before the general could react, Ruby's eyes flickered with an unnatural glow, and she extended her hand toward the soldier. With a burst of force, the soldier was thrown across the hallway, crashing into the wall with a bone-shattering impact. The general's eyes widened in shock and concern as she looked at her daughter. "Ruby," she exclaimed. "Mom, it's fine," Ruby said, shaking her head and dismissing the glowing effect. "That man was trying to hurt you. You can trust me." The general stared at her daughter in disbelief, not quite believing what she'd just heard. "He wasn't." General Hale sighed, wrapping her arms around her daughter tightly. "Just, don't do that again, unless I specifically tell you to." Ruby chuckled humorlessly, nodding her agreement. She had been exhibiting these strange powers ever since merging with the gravitonium, a rare metal that possesses unique gravitational properties, and the general had hoped that they could train her to keep them under control. But it seemed like Ruby's powers were growing more powerful with each day, and the general feared what that meant for her daughter's safety. "Ruby, we need to keep moving," the general said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the turmoil inside her. "We have to find a way out of here." Ruby nodded, her unfocused eyes wondering about her surroundings as she followed her mother through the twisting corridors of the Hydra research base. As they continued their frantic journey, they could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer behind them. Then, turning a corner, they saw the first bodies littering the hallway ahead of them. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds of dead soldiers lying in the blood-stained corridor, the walls freshly painted in red as numerous cuts and slashes covered the bodies. Many of the corpses were missing limbs, their heads caved in, and some even decapitated. General Hale took a shuddering breath, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Mom, who did this?" Ruby asked, her voice trembling with fear and curiosity. General Hale kept her eyes forward, her mind racing as she searched for a way to escape the base. "I don't know," she replied, her voice low and tense. "But we need to find a way out of here before they find us." The two of them hurried down one hallway after another, searching for any sign of an exit. But everywhere they turned, they were met with locked doors and dead ends. The general's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that they were trapped, with no way out. As they turned another corner, the general couldn't help but gasp. Ahead of them, a unit of enhanced Hydra soldiers was firing their various weapons and abilities down the hall at what looked to be a single armored figure, who strolled casually through the hail of bullets and blasts. His skeletal smile and glowing crimson eyes painted a gruesome portrait of the man's true nature as he sauntered down the hall. As he neared the unit, the armored figure stretched out his arms before bringing his gauntleted hands together with a thunderous force. Clap. Asterisk. A wave of sonic energy rippled out from the center of his palms, shattering any glass along the hall and sending the soldiers flying down the long hallway toward the mother and daughter. "Ruby!" General Hale screamed, prompting the young woman to raise her hand in the direction of the incoming bodies. With a surge of gravitational force, the bodies slowed in the air, before slamming down into the floor with such pressure that the tiles cracked and shattered, the concrete caving in from the strength of the impact. From the far end of the hall, Brock watched the spectacle with slight interest, his curiosity piqued as he noticed that the young woman's powers were way above the level of the soldiers he had dealt with so far. Again, Ruby conjured a burst of force, sending the soldiers flying back the way they'd come from. Brock didn't even flinch, standing his ground as the dead soldiers' bodies crashed into him and fell to the ground in a heap. Interesting, Brock mused aloud, his voice resonating with dark amusement. Ruby's mismatched eyes narrowed as she faced the armored figure, her powers crackling with gravitational energy. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice laced with a mix of fear and defiance. Brock grinned behind his skeletal faceplate which mirrored his expression, as his crimson eyes locked onto the young woman. "I'm a little hurt you don't recognize me," he declared, his jovial voice carrying a menacing tone. "I thought you never forget your first." Sensing the danger radiating off the armored man, General Hale stepped protectively in front of Ruby, her mind racing for a way to take down or escape from the formidable opponent before them. "Stay away from my daughter," she commanded, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. Brock chuckled darkly, taking a menacing step forward. "Relax, General. Just saying hey to a past fling," he taunted. General Hale looked confused at those words. "What are you talking?" Beep, 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 asterisk. Suddenly, a loud beeping sound rang out from Brock's comm device, interrupting the general's words and breaking the tense standoff. Brock frowned, tapping the device to answer the call. "What is it?" he growled into the device. "Boss, I've found the other target," Zeru's voice came through the comm. "He's moving towards the holding cells on level B4. A malicious grin spread across Brock's faceplate as he heard the news. "Good work. We'll finish up here, then head that way," he replied, ending the call. "Looks like our reunion will have to be short," Brock said, turning his attention back to the general and Ruby. "I've got some other business to attend to." General Hale backed away warily as the armored figure sauntered toward them, her mind racing with questions and confusion. "Wait, who are you? Why are you attacking this base?" she called out, hoping to stall the mysterious man for as long as possible. Brock paused and slightly chuckles at that, lamenting to himself how his revenge would be pointless if they didn't know who was killing them. With a thought, his helmet retracts into the back of his armor as he revealed his familiar face to the mother and daughter pair. The general's eyes widened slightly in vague recognition at the reveal, while Ruby's heart skipped a beat as she immediately recognized the face under the dark armor. "B. Brock," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Is that really you?" "Hey, long time no see," Brock replied, ignoring the inner turmoil the young woman was obviously going through at the sight of him. I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, look, it's good to see you and all." Like the new look, Brock started as he took a step closer, his muscles tense and poised to strike. "But I kinda have to kill your mom now." 2014. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Main level. Omniscient POV. Wait, what?" Ruby exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock as her mind struggled to process the situation. "Brock, what are you talking about? Why would you want to kill my mom?" Brock sighed, a mix of frustration and annoyance evident as he spoke. "Look, it's complicated," he said, his voice dropping the jovial tone it had possessed only moments ago. "And I don't really feel like going into a whole thing right now. Just know that your mom's a liability, and I need her gone." Ruby shook her head, refusing to accept what Brock was saying. "And no, this doesn't make sense. This can't be happening," she muttered, her voice barely audible as she tried to wrap her head around the impossible decision she was being forced to make. General Hale's expression hardened as she saw her daughter's distress and she stepped forward, moving to Ruby's side while keeping her eyes planted on the threat in front of them. "Listen to me, young lady," she began, her quiet voice firm and confident, though a hint of unease trembled beneath the surface. "This isn't the time for panic. We need to stay strong and focused. Don't let this bastard manipulate you." Brock let out a mocking chuckle, his gaze shifting between Ruby and General Hale as he observed their interaction. "Quite the mother-daughter bond you got there," he commented with a smirk, directing his attention back to Ruby. "But seriously, just step aside and let me handle this. I'm not really interested in hurting you. You expect us just to believe that?" the general replied, her voice rising with desperation as she held onto her daughter. "Don't trust him, baby, he's just trying to separate us. Kill him and let's get out of here." Ruby's emotions were in turmoil as she looked back and forth between the two, her past memories of Brock clashing with the armored figure before her. She then looked over her mother, the woman who allowed her to be subjected to the experiments that made her what she was today, but who also stood beside her when she needed her most. She knew she wouldn't be able to live with herself knowing that she'd left her defenseless mother alone to face Brock, even if he were still the same man he used to be. Slowly, Ruby moved in front of her mother protectively, a single tear streaming down her cheek as she stared Brock in the eyes. "Brock, I can't leave her," Ruby whispered, her voice wavering with emotion. "She's my mother, and no matter what she's done, I can't just abandon her." At those words, Brock's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, crimson glare that sent shivers down both women's spines. "Such a waste," he muttered, his voice betraying his genuine disappointment. Brock shook his head slightly before lifting his gaze back to the pair. "You can kill her," he stated simply as his helmet folded over his face once more. In an instant, a concealed blade emerged from the shadows where it had been waiting, plunging into Ruby's neck. Her eyes went wide, her mouth agape in surprise as crystal blue blood gushed from the tear in her thin metallic skin. "Our Ruby!" General Hale cried out, rushing forward to try and stem the bleeding that was already pooling around her daughter's throat. Ruby stumbled to the floor, her hands instinctively reaching for her wounded neck. Shock and pain washed over her as she stared at Brock in disbelief, her eyes filled with betrayal. "Be Brock," she managed to gurgle out, her voice strained and weak. General Hale's hands were covered in her daughter's blood as she desperately tried to stop the bleeding, her eyes burning with anger and sorrow as she glared at the armored figure before them. "You monster," she spat, her voice quivering with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Brock ignored the general's words, his attention solely focused on Ruby as he watched her struggle to stop the bleeding. Ghost appeared behind the mother and daughter, her intangible form materializing with an eerie grace. Her eyes glowed an ominous shade of blue as she studied the scene before her. Without warning, her eyes shifted to General Hale, and she reached out and snatched the woman by her hair, before dragging her to kneel in front of Brock, the general's tears mixing with the dirt and blood that stained her uniform. Meanwhile, Ruby's vision was beginning to blur, her strength waning as her body fought to stay conscious. She could do nothing but be forced to watch, as her mother was humiliated and forced to kneel before the people who had just harmed her. Brock stared down at the crying woman before him with a cold, calculating gaze. His skull-like faceplate revealed his chilling smile as he regarded her. "Isn't it touching, General? A daughter's love," he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Too bad it won't save either of you." General Hale's tear-filled eyes bore into Brock's, a mixture of hatred and defiance in her gaze. She refused to let him see her fear. "You think this power you have makes you invincible, but it won't save you. You won't get away with this. Hydra will make you pay," she shouted defiantly, her voice cracking as she spoke. Brock's lips curled into a dark smile beneath his helmet. "Is that so? Well, we'll just have to wait and see about that." Without another word, he raised his armored arms, and 10 wickedly sharp-bladed claws emerged from his gauntlets. The general's eyes widened in realization as she realized what was about to happen. "No, no, please," she begged, her voice a desperate plea. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. With ruthless efficiency, Brock brought down the claws, ending the general's life in quick, brutal strikes. The sound of the blades slicing through flesh and bone was sickening, and the general's body slumped forward into pieces, lifeless. Ruby's vision blurred even further as she watched her mother's lifeless form collapse to the ground. Her gurgled cries mixed with the sound of her own blood, the pain in her throat and heart almost too much to bear. Brock stared down at the fallen woman, his expression hidden behind the helmet, but his satisfaction was palpable. "Pathetic," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain as he looked down at the once proud general. He turned his gaze to Ruby, who was now clutching her bleeding neck, her life slipping away with each passing second. "Should have just taken the deal," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any remorse. Ruby's scream was choked off by the blood gurgling in her throat as she stared at her mother's lifeless form, her body trembling from a mixture of pain, fear, and grief. Her grip on her wound tightened as she tried to keep herself from passing out. Brock stood there for a moment, looking down at the scene with his skull-like visage. Then, with a dismissive snort, he turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing through the corridor. Ruby's grief and rage surged within her, fueled by the sight of her mother's death. Despite her weakened state, she mustered every ounce of her remaining strength, her mismatched eyes glowing with intense gravitational energy. With a guttural scream, she unleashed her powers, a torrent of gravitational force slamming into Brock and Ghost. Ghost was thrown back into a wall, her form phasing through the tough stone before she could collide, while Brock staggered slightly but managed to maintain his position. Ruby's own body was pushed to the limit as she channeled her powers, her vision going dark around the edges as her world spun. She clutched her bleeding neck, tears mixing with her blood as she focused on her target. She couldn't allow Brock to leave her alive, not after what he had done. With the last of her strength, she unleashed a powerful surge of energy. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned, and debris began to float off the ground as the gravitational forces around her spiraled out of control. But Brock shook off the impact of Ruby's powers, his armored boots sinking into the ground as he resisted the intense gravitational force. He slowly began to move forward, each step deliberate and powerful, as he pushed against the current of gravity that sought to keep him at bay. His muscles strained against the force that threatened to crush him. His eyes blazed with determination as he moved forward, step by agonizing step, closing the distance between himself and Ruby. As the corridor around them began to crumble and collapse, Brock's armor absorbed the energy, his form pulsating with a crimson aura. He raised his gauntleted hand, his fingers glowing with power as he reached out toward Ruby, his grip unyielding. Ruby's strength was fading rapidly, her powers waning as her body reached its limits. She stumbled back, her legs giving out beneath her as she fell to the ground, her vision blurring as unconsciousness threatened to overtake her. Brock continued his relentless advance, his armor crackling with crimson energy as he defied the force of Ruby's powers. He reached down and grabbed Ruby by her bleeding neck, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. Ruby gasped, her eyes fluttering as she struggled to stay awake. Her lips formed the word as best they could with the wet blood coating her mouth. Brock smiled beneath his helmet, his eyes staring at her hungrily. "Oh, don't worry," Brock sneered, his voice laced with cold amusement. "You'll be joining her soon enough." With a swift, brutal motion, he tightened his grip on Ruby's neck, his armored claws digging further into her wounded dark gray skin. Ruby's eyes widened in a final moment of terror and pain as she looked up at Brock, the man who had once been a friend, a first love, but was now her executioner. Her heartbeat slowed, her thoughts becoming a jumbled mess as the darkness closed in. Her body went limp in his grasp, her last gurgled breath escaping her lips. The corridor around them was in shambles, debris floating in the chaotic gravitational field she had created. As Ruby's lifeless form hung from his hand, Brock's grip loosened and he let her body fall to the ground. He stared down at her for a moment, a mixture of satisfaction and pity in his glowing crimson eyes. Ghost appeared beside him, her ethereal form drifting above the rubble. "Keep her body safe," Brock ordered with a dismissive wave. "It might come in handy later." Ghost nodded in acknowledgement, her gaze never leaving Ruby's lifeless form. "And you?" she inquired, her eyes meeting his through their respective helmets. "Where are you off to now?" Brock's lips curled into a dark smile, his posture exuding confidence and malevolence. "Need to go catch a rat in the basement," he replied, his tone casual and relaxed. "Won't be long." Brock turned, walking away from the scene of the crime, and leaving Ghost and Ruby's lifeless body behind. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Basement level. A few floors below Brock and his team, Dr. Whitehall's footsteps echoed down the dimly lit corridor as he strode through the labyrinthine holding cells of the Hydra Research Base's basement level. The air was damp, carrying a stale scent that spoke of confinement and despair. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow that danced across the cold, concrete walls. The holding cells themselves were constructed of thick metal and one-sided glass, each one showing an array of tragic figures, some visibly scarred by experimentation, others seemingly lost in the depths of their own tortured minds. A young man trailed behind Dr. Whitehall, his presence barely noticeable in the shadows. Clad in a skin-tight jumpsuit, the fabric clung to his lithe frame, outlining the contours of his body. But what drew the eye most was the grotesque metal cap that encased his skull, replacing what should have been a crown of silver hair. Wires and tubes snaked out from the cap, disappearing into the jumpsuit. The man's expression was vacant, his eyes distant, as if he were a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Dr. Whitehall moved with purpose, his steps confident and unyielding. He approached each holding cell, his gloved hand occasionally reaching out to touch the reinforced glass that separated him from the subjects within. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned each inmate as he muttered to himself in a low, disdainful tone. Failed experiment. Useless augmentation. Inefficient enhancement, he muttered as he passed by each cell, his voice echoing through the corridor like a chilling mantra. The prisoners inside the cells, their faces a mix of fear and desperation, pressed themselves against the glass as if hoping for a reprieve from their torment. Some had mutations that had gone horribly wrong, while others bore the scars of experiments that had twisted their bodies and minds beyond recognition. Dr. Whitehall's gaze passed over them without a hint of sympathy. His determined stride led him further down the corridor, toward a cell that was set apart from the others. The reinforced door of this cell was thicker, the glass more opaque, and the security measures more stringent. It was evident that whatever was housed within was of significant importance to Dr. Whitehall. As he reached the cell, he paused and turned to the young man behind him, his expression a mix of impatience and superiority. "Stay here and keep watch," he ordered curtly, his voice dripping with authority. The young man nodded silently, his movements almost mechanical as he positioned himself just outside the cell, his vacant eyes still downcast, the grotesque metal scalp gleaming in the dim light. Turning his attention back to the cell, Dr. Whitehall activated the control panel beside the door. The door hissed open, revealing a small, sterile room with a single cot and a desk making up its only furnishings. Within, a restrained young woman was huddled in the corner, her hands and feet bound together in steel manacles. Her pale skin was caked with dried blood, and a thin layer of grime obscured the wounds that marred her soft flesh. She was clothed in simple gray clothes, the same drab uniform as the other inmates, and a mane of dirty auburn hair ran down her shoulders. Her expression was inscrutable, but her eyes glowed with an unnatural scarlet light. Dr. Whitehall stepped into the room, his expression a mix of fascination and calculation. He moved closer to the restrained woman, his gloved fingers reaching out to touch her face with a mixture of curiosity and cruelty. "Your kind has always intrigued me," he murmured, his voice dripping with a perverse sort of excitement. "So resistant to our methods, so unlike the failures that litter this facility." The woman's eyes glowed brighter as she let out a low, primal growl, a mixture of anger and defiance reverberating through the small room. Her scarlet gaze bore into Dr. Whitehall's with an intensity that matched his own twisted fascination. Dr. Whitehall's lips curled into a chilling smile as he leaned in closer, his face mere inches from hers. His gloved fingers traced the contours of her blood-stained skin, a sickening mixture of scientific curiosity and sadistic pleasure in his touch. "But you, my dear, you are different," he whispered, his voice a velvety caress that contrasted sharply with the malice in his words. "Your abilities may very well hold the key to unlocking the true potential of my experiments." He brought his head close to hers, his lips brushing against her ear, his breath tickling her neck. "There is so much we can learn, so much we can do together." The scarlet light in the woman's eyes grew brighter as her muscles tensed. Dr. Whitehall glanced back at the young man standing guard outside the cell, his expression twisting into a sadistic grin. If only time were more accommodating, he mused, his focus returning to the woman before him. "For now, shall we indulge in a little family reunion?" Confusion flickered across the woman's eyes, her resistance momentarily ceasing. "What do you mean?" she inquired, her voice fragile, as though disused. Dr. Whitehall's grin widened with mischief. "Join us, Pietro," he announced cheerfully, projecting his voice for the young man outside the cell. "Come and greet your sister." 2014. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Basement level. Omniscient POV. "Join us, Pietro," Dr. Whitehall announced cheerfully, projecting his voice for the young man outside the cell. "Come and greet your sister." At his words, the young man who stood just outside the reinforced cell doors, his head bowed in contemplation, suddenly started forward with inhuman speed. In an instant, he appeared inside the chamber, his body stiff and awkward as he gazed at the woman restrained within. The metal attached to his scalp glistened in the dim light, and his vacant eyes flickered slightly with a hint of recognition. The scarlet glow emanating from the woman's eyes dimmed slightly as they locked onto Pietro, her expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. Her mind raced as she tried to process the unexpected arrival. A jumble of memories and emotions surged within her, memories of a time long gone, a family torn apart. Pietro. She breathed, her voice tinged with both hope and incredulity. Dr. Whitehall stood off to the side and watched the exchange with a sadistic smile. His amusement was evident in the way he relished their emotional turmoil. Pietro stammered, his voice breaking as he struggled to find his words amid the programming infused within him. The scarlet glow faded from the woman's eyes, replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It had been 2 years since they'd both been taken captive, and even though she knew they were being held in the same facility, she hadn't seen or heard anything of him until this moment. "Oh, how touching," Dr. Whitehall crooned, his voice dripping with mockery. A family reunion in the heart of HYDRA's finest establishment. Wanda's eyes flickered between Pietro and Dr. Whitehall, not sure what was happening or why her twin brother now looked like some kind of botched Frankenstein monster. She wanted to reach out to her brother, to hug him, to tell him how much she missed him and that everything will be okay, but she couldn't move. All she could do was gaze at him helplessly with tear-filled eyes, waiting for something to make sense again. Pietro's gaze shifted from his sister to his master, Dr. Whitehall. His eyes narrowed as a spark of defiance broke through the fog of his conditioning. Memories, fragments of his past, began to pierce through the hazy mental barriers that Hydra had constructed in his mind. He remembered moments of happiness, of laughter, and shared secrets with his sister. He remembered a life before they were both ensnared in this nightmare. But even as he tried to remember those precious memories, he could feel how the machine that was now attached to his brain was altering and twisting them, distorting and erasing any trace of their existence. Wanda could see something in Pietro's eyes, something that worried her deeply. It was almost like there was an internal struggle going on within her brother's mind, a battle of wills where the machine was slowly winning out over the remnants of his humanity. Pietro's eyes glazed over, and the lines around his mouth deepened with a grimace of pain. As that unnerving vacant and placid expression settled upon his features once more. What have you done to him?" Wanda demanded, her eyes beginning to emit an ominous crimson radiance. Dr. Whitehall glanced between the twins, and his smirk became wider. "I've simply shown him his rightful place in this cruel world," he replied merrily as if commenting on the weather. "A puppet forced to dance for my amusement." His mocking tone cut through Wanda's heart, and she felt herself go numb all over, unable to comprehend what was happening. "No, no, no," Wanda screamed in anguish as she struggled against her restraints, her hands starting to flare with an ethereal scarlet glow. "You cannot have him. I won't let you take another part of me away." She grits her teeth as the radiance intensified, growing brighter by the second. But just as the scarlet energy was about to be unleashed, the metallic bands of her restraints glowed with a sudden surge of energy, absorbing and neutralizing the energy Wanda was emitting. The technology embedded within her restraints recognizes the impending danger and responds by restricting her powers. The scarlet radiance enveloping Wanda quickly flickered and died down, leaving her panting and frustrated. Dr. Whitehall watched with amusement as Wanda's attempt to break free was thwarted. "Ah, the unpredictable power of mutants," he mused, his eyes gleaming with fascination. "So much potential, yet with a little science and ingenuity, so easily controlled." Wanda's breaths were ragged, her frustration boiling over as she glared at Dr. Whitehall. The realization of how powerless she truly was in this situation was like a heavy weight settling over her. Pietro's vacant gaze remained locked on his sister, his expression now a mask of indifference, a stark contrast to the emotions that had briefly flickered within him. The machine attached to his skull pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of the hold Hydra had over him. "Pete, please," Wanda's voice cracked, her eyes welling with tears as she pleaded with Dr. Whitehall. "Let him go. Take me instead. Please, I'll do anything you want. Just, please, release him." Dr. Whitehall's sadistic smile widened as he leaned in closer to Wanda, relishing in her desperation. "Oh, you sweet child," he cooed mockingly, such a touching display of sisterly affection. "How heartwarming." Wanda's voice trembled as she continued to beg, her desperation pushing her to new depths. "I'll do whatever you want," she implored, her voice quivering. "Just release him from whatever you've done to him. Take me instead. Just let him be free." Dr. Whitehall's gaze bore into Wanda's with a cruel intensity, his amusement evident in his cold, calculating eyes. "I think you seem to have misunderstood your position here, my dear," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. You see, you don't really have a choice in this matter, and I don't plan on letting either of you go. As he spoke, his thoughts danced with visions of possessing two powerful mutant slaves, bending them to his will, and using their abilities for his own dark purposes. The possibilities were intoxicating, but just as his sinister musings reached their peak, a powerful tremor suddenly shook the very foundation of the building. The walls around them groaned, and the ceiling above them cracked, sending dust and debris raining down. Dr. Whitehall's triumphant reverie was shattered, and his attention snapped back to the immediate danger at hand. His sadistic grin faltered as he realized that something disastrous was happening above them. What in the world, he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. The tremors continued, intensifying with each passing second, as the alarms continued blaring throughout the facility, their shrill wails filling the air. Dr. Whitehall turned to Pietro, his voice commanding and urgent. Prepare her for transport, quickly. We need to evacuate this place immediately. Pietro's vacant gaze seemed to sharpen for a moment as he processed Dr. Whitehall's words. Without a second thought, he moved with blinding speed. The metal attachments on his scalp glinted as he moved in a blur, disconnecting the restraints that held Wanda against the wall. With a swift motion, he grabbed hold of the chains that had bound her and guided her out of the cell. Wanda stumbled forward, her body feeling weak from the ordeal. She looked up at Pietro, a mixture of sadness and concern in her eyes. Dr. Whitehall hurriedly led the way, his footsteps echoing down the corridor as he directed them through the dimly lit halls towards a heavy door that presumably led further down the facility. The sound of the alarms and the rumbling tremors echoed around them, creating an atmosphere of chaos and impending danger. The two mutants and Dr. Whitehall reached the door and he began entering a code to open it, but just as he finished inputting the code and took the first step through the newly opened doorway. Crash! Asterisk. A deafening impact reverberated from behind them, drowning out the alarms as the ceiling above the holding cells a few feet behind them suddenly collapsed in a cascade of stone and debris, filling the lower level with dust and smoke. The shockwave rippled through the hallway, causing the walls to shudder and the lights to flicker. Dr. Whitehall turned back, his face a mask of shock as he saw the destruction. Amidst the settling dust and dim lights, a pair of glowing crimson eyes stared back at him, piercing through the smoke and chaos. A sense of dread washed over him as he spotted a figure clad in gleaming, blackened armor stepping forward through the hail of debris, his presence radiating an aura of raw power. The fear in Dr. Whitehall's eyes was palpable as he stumbled over his own feet, desperately retreating from the advancing figure. At his side, Pietro tightened his grip around the chains as he instinctively shielded Wanda behind him, his gaze also drawn to the source of the disturbance. Without wasting a moment, Dr. Whitehall slammed his hand down on the control panel, initiating the door sealing sequence. As the heavy door began to slide shut, he caught a glimpse of the armored figure's unrelenting advance, his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. With a final, desperate push, the door sealed shut, cutting off the pursuing figure and leaving him on the other side. Dr. Whitehall leaned against the wall, his chest heaving as he frantically entered a sequence on the panel beside the sealed door, activating a deadly poisonous gas that quickly spread through the lower level of the holding cells. As the poisonous gas began to fill the lower level, the tortured prisoners trapped within their cages began to writhe and convulse as the deadly gas filled their lungs. Their screams of agony pierced the air, creating a gruesome symphony of suffering as their bodies bleed and contorted in horrifying ways. Dr. Whitehall's lips twisted into a cruel smile as he watched the carnage unfold on the security monitors. The agonizing deaths of those trapped within brought him a sick sense of satisfaction, a reminder of his genius and the power he wielded. But the smile on his face soon vanished as he saw the armored figure with the glowing crimson eyes emerge from the poisonous cloud, seemingly unaffected by the deadly gas. With a relaxed stride, the armored figure walked through the scattered rubble of fallen stone and debris, his glowing eyes not even acknowledging the numerous dying prisoners who writhed in agony around him as his gaze was locked onto the barred door before him. As he reached the heavy door, his armored gauntlets curled into a fist and, with a powerful motion, he struck out with a tremendous force that shook the entire structure of the holding cells. The massive doors shuddered under the immense impact, but the powerful blow only left a sizable deep dent in the augmented metal. The figure paused momentarily, clearly impressed with the strength of the door's construction. "Impressive," he remarked, his voice, distorted by the modulator in his helmet, sounding almost amused. though I doubt it would hold me for long. He shrugged the thought away as if it were nothing more than a trivial detail, then stepped forward once more and prepared to strike again. Boom. Asterisk. On the other side of the sealed door, Wanda's scarlet eyes shimmered with a mixture of awe and curiosity. She had witnessed the arrival of this mysterious figure, and his power was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Beside her, Pietro's vacant expression had shifted to a mix of puzzlement and apprehension. The programmed loyalty that had been ingrained in him was warring with a growing sense of danger. Dr. Whitehall turned away from the monitors, his breath still labored from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He exchanged a tense look with Pietro and Wanda, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "We need to keep moving," he snapped, his voice shaky but determined. "There's another way out from here. Follow me." They hurried down the dimly lit corridor, the sounds of the blaring alarm mixing with the occasional heavy thud of the massive door being battered by the relentless assault of the armored figure behind them. Dr. Whitehall's fingers danced over a control panel beside the next door they reached, and the heavy door slid open, revealing a stairway that led further into the depths of the facility. "Keep moving," Dr. Whitehall demanded as they hastened down the passageway. As they ran, Dr. Whitehall called out a warning to Pietro. "And make sure you keep hold of her." Pietro nodded numbly as he dragged his sister along behind him, his gaze focused ahead on where they were going. The two men focused on what lay ahead, failed to notice that the young woman they were escorting was slowly beginning to detach from her immediate surroundings. Her eyes, which had been wildly flickering with a light scarlet glow, seemed to lose focus on the path ahead. Instead, they were drawn backward, locked onto the direction they had come from, where the armored figure's presence had left an indelible mark. Despite the urgency of their situation, an otherworldly pull tugged at Wanda's senses, a faint yet persistent whisper in her mind that seemed to beckon her to turn around, to return to the figure who radiated with that familiar power and an enigmatic connection she couldn't quite explain. Pietro's steps faltered for a fraction of a second as he felt a subtle change in Wanda's pace. He cast a backward glance at his sister, his expression blank but with a hint of concern as he registered the distant look in her eyes. "Street. IFO. See you." Said, he muttered, his mangled voice soft but laced with a note of urgency. Dr. Whitehall cast a quick glance back at the siblings, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Keep moving, both of you," he barked, his patience wearing thin. But Wanda's attention remained divided, torn between the path ahead and the mysterious figure behind them. The tremors and alarms faded into the background as a singular thought occupied her mind, a yearning to understand the connection that seemed to bind her to the armored enigma behind them. As they continued down the passageway, Dr. Whitehall led the way, his steps quick and determined. Pietro dragged Wanda along, his pace a bit uneven as he cast wary glances between her and their surroundings. Wanda's steps began to slow, her eyes still fixed on the path behind them. The pull she felt was almost magnetic, like a tether trying to draw her back. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it was becoming harder and harder to resist. Every fiber of her being seemed attuned to the presence behind them, the presence that had ignited a spark of recognition within her. The scarlet glow in her eyes flickered, its intensity varying in sync with the fluctuations of her emotions. Dr. Whitehall led them through a labyrinthine maze of corridors and chambers, his steps quick and purposeful. The alarms and tremors continued to reverberate through the facility, creating an atmosphere of chaos and urgency. As they reached another intersection in the facility's labyrinthine corridors, they came upon a large reinforced cage situated along the side of the passageway that was blocked by a steel grate. Beyond the bars, the cage seemed to hold nothing but an impenetrable darkness. Though the space beyond the iron grates appeared empty and dark, a chilling ripple passed through the air as a low growl sounded from deep within the shadows. The growl echoed off the concrete walls as the cage began to rattle ominously. Dr. Whitehall paid the cage no mind, his attention consumed by their escape. He continued to lead them through the labyrinth of passages, the alarms and tremors serving as a constant reminder of the approaching threat. But just as they rounded another corner, the echoing alarms abruptly ceased, plunging them into an eerie silence. The corridor ahead was dimly lit, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. Dr. Whitehall's steps faltered, his gaze darting around the corridor in confusion. The abrupt stillness was disconcerting, a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded them moments ago. "Something's not right," he muttered to himself, his voice laced with unease. Pietro's grip on Wanda tightened as he scanned their surroundings, his senses on high alert. He could feel the tension in the air, a sense of foreboding that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Wanda's eyes remained fixed on the path behind them, the pull growing stronger with each passing second. Her scarlet gaze flickered, the intensity of her emotions oscillating between uncertainty and recognition. And then, without warning, a loud boom reverberated through the corridor behind them. The sound was deafening, echoing off the walls and sending vibrations through the floor. All the lights in the chamber suddenly went out, plunging them into complete darkness. The abrupt change was disorienting, a stark shift from the dimly lit corridors they had just been navigating. Dr. Whitehall's panic was palpable as he fumbled for a flashlight, his hands shaking as he struggled to regain his bearings. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. He turned back toward the path they had been following, determined to reach the emergency evacuation hatch that would lead them out to the bottom of the mountain. But as he took a step forward, he suddenly froze as a sense of dread and despair abruptly invaded his mind. Looking for the source of the pressure, Dr. Whitehall turned around to the path they had come from and noticed a pair of glowing crimson eyes staring back at him from the darkness, their eerie radiance cutting through the pitch-black surroundings. The eyes were unwavering, fixed on him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Fear clawed at Dr. Whitehall's chest, his heart racing as he stumbled back a few paces. The dim light of his flashlight illuminated only a fraction of the corridor, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around the mysterious figure behind them. Pietro's grip on Wanda's bonds tightened even further, his own anxiety escalating as he turned to face the enigmatic presence. Wanda's gaze shifted from the corridor ahead to the darkness behind them. The pull that had been tugging at her senses now intensified, drawing her attention to the figure with the glowing crimson eyes. The darkness seemed to cling to the figure, cloaking him in an aura of mystery and danger. Wanda's scarlet eyes shimmered as she felt a strange sense of recognition, a connection that defied explanation. The crimson eyes grew closer with each passing moment before a frightening skeletal visage seemed to materialize out of the shadows. The figure strolled forward, his armored form and glowing eyes casting an eerie glow around him. The darkness seemed to bend and ripple around his presence, creating an aura of otherworldly power. Dr. Whitehall's panic escalated, and he frantically waved the flashlight in the direction of the figure, his voice trembling as he spoke. Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, his attempts at bravado failing as fear crept into his voice. The armored figure continued his advance, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried. His modulated voice, still carrying that same chilling relaxed cadence, cut through the darkness like a blade. "I am Death," he intoned, his words dripping with a macabre sense of finality. "And I've come to collect what I'm owed. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories." 2014. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Lower basement level. Drive Whitehall POV. "I am Death," the armored figure intoned, his words dripping with a macabre sense of finality. "And I've come to collect what is owed." The tension in the air was palpable as his gruff, modulated voice reverberated through the dimly lit corridor and hung over me like a shroud. The flickering beam of my flashlight revealed only a glimpse of his ominous form advancing with an eerie grace that sent a shiver down my spine. As he drew nearer, the figure's crimson eyes seemed to glow brighter, as the lines in the suit of his armor began to lightly pulse with the same crimson glow, as though eager to penetrate the darkness and reveal his terrifying visage. My heart pounded in my chest as the facade of control I was trying to project was slowly shattering in the face of this enigmatic threat. My hand trembled as I struggled to keep the flashlight steady, the weak beam casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The armored figure's words and aura had ignited a primal fear within me, one that I had never experienced before. The notion of death personified, of reckoning for my actions, chilled me to my core. I was a scientist, a man of intellect and calculation, and yet at this moment, I felt utterly powerless. What are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice cracking as I tried to assert authority that was rapidly slipping away. "Do you even know who you're messing with? This place is under Hydra's protection." The armored figure's response was a cold chuckle that seemed to echo through the corridor, mocking my feeble attempts to assert control. "Protection? Is that what you call this?" he retorted, his voice dripping with derision. "I've infiltrated your facility, slaughtered my way through the throng of ants you call guards, and just killed one of your most powerful agents. Safe to say your notion of protection is nothing more than a delusion. Stay back. I managed to croak, my voice shaky as I registered his words and took a step backward. What the hell is going on here? I was supposed to be the one in control, the one orchestrating everything to my advantage. But in the face of this relentless thing, all my carefully laid plans felt like paper in a hurricane. The armored figure's steps remained unhurried, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. The atmosphere grew heavy with a sense of impending doom, and despite my attempts to assert authority, I felt a growing sense of powerlessness well up inside me with each heavy step he took. Beside me, Pietro tightened his grip on Wanda's restraints, his tense posture revealing a mixture of fear and strain. He remained silent, his vacant gaze shifting between the figure and me, torn between his programmed loyalty to me and an undeniable awareness of the overwhelming danger. Wanda's attention, however, remained riveted on the armored figure. Her scarlet eyes shimmered with a mix of fascination and trepidation, as a strange dazed look overtook her face. As the armored figure drew closer, his presence seemed to make the air crackle with a charged energy, and a feeling of inevitability settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Look, whoever you are, there's no reason we need to resort to violence. I shouted, my voice wavering but desperate. I have connections, resources. I can offer you anything you desire. The armored figure's steps halted for a moment, and I dared to hope that my words had struck a chord, that perhaps negotiation would be possible. But then a low, almost mocking chuckle reverberated within the confines of his helmet. It was a sound that sent a shiver down my spine, for it carried an air of indifference, as if my pleas were nothing more than the desperate cries of a trapped animal. Anything I desire. His voice resonated, laced with an eerie calmness that seemed to amplify the weight of his words. Like what, Doctor? Money, power, security, maybe even a high-ranking position within your damnable organization. His scornful laughter echoed throughout the corridor, seeming to mock my very attempt at persuasion. It was clear that he wasn't listening to me anymore, and there was nothing else to be said. The armored figure's unflinching gaze made it plain that he had already reached the conclusion of our conflict. I was cornered, and my options were limited. Though I was loath to waste him here, I knew that my only viable course of action was to use the only weapon I had at my disposal, my mutant pawn. My fingers tightened around the small remote that was connected to Pietro's cybernetic attachments, a desperate idea forming in my mind. The armored figure's appearance might have sent my carefully crafted plans into disarray, but I wasn't going to just let this be the end of my story. Pietro, I hissed, my voice a mix of anxiety and determination. Kill him. Now. The words left my lips with a frenzied urgency, driven by the surge of adrenaline and a desperate need to regain control of the situation. Pietro's loyalty to me had been meticulously ingrained, his programming compelling him to obey my commands without question. With a flicker of motion, Pietro moved. In an instant, he released his hold of Wanda's restraints, his movements a blur as he charged toward the armored figure with incredible speed. The sound of his footsteps was like a rapid drumbeat, echoing through the corridor. The armored figure's gaze shifted from me to Pietro, his stance unwavering. He seemed unimpressed by Pietro's rapid approach, his reaction time surprisingly swift for someone encased in such heavy armor as his glowing orbs followed the blur of movement as if tracking a predictable path. Crack. Asterisk. Pietro moved with a momentum that belied his lanky frame, his lightning-fast fist striking the figure's chest with a resounding crack, but to my astonishment, the impact barely seemed to register. The figure's armor absorbed the blow with almost casual ease, his body unwavering despite the force of Pietro's attack. Pietro, on the other hand, staggered back a few steps, his expression of shock mirroring mine as he raised his now bloody and disfigured hand in disbelief. It was clear that the blow had done more damage to him than his opponent, as the bones in his hand were obviously fractured from the impact. Impossible, I exclaimed, my voice a mixture of astonishment and horror. Pietro's inhuman speed was supposed to make him a formidable asset, but this armored bastard had withstood his blow without even flinching. Is that the best you can do? He taunted, his voice carrying a note of mockery as his armored hand shot forward in a blur of motion, almost catching Pietro off guard. But Pietro was alert, reacting with admirable speed as he ducked to the side, avoiding the fatal strike that would have crushed his skull. Still, the air behind the force of the blow sent him staggering across the floor as he quickly regained his balance and moved back cautiously. The speedster's movements slowed as he reeled from the realization that his attack had been rendered almost ineffective against the formidable armor of the figure. Pietro's vacant eyes flicked between me and the armored figure, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. The reality of the situation seemed to be dawning on him, the realization that his enhanced abilities were inadequate against this new threat. The armored visage tilted slightly, his gaze shifting to Pietro's bloodied hand as he spoke. "Just lay down, you're not strong enough to beat me." As the invader's words hung in the air, my heart pounded in my chest as I realized that my last attempt to regain control of this situation had failed. The fact was a bitter pill to swallow, the taste of defeat leaving a sour tang on my tongue. But I wasn't one to admit defeat easily. I had manipulated the course of countless world events, orchestrated the deaths of millions of people, and I wouldn't let it all crumble in an instant. I had one last card to play, and I was determined to see it through. With a mixture of desperation and calculated resolve, I made a split-second decision. As the figure's attention remained focused on Pietro, I fumbled for the chain of Wanda's restraints on the ground and pulled her back into the fray, making sure that she was between me and the armored opponent. Wanda's scarlet gaze flicked toward me, but quickly moved back to the ongoing battle as she watched with wide listless eyes. "Come with me, Wanda," I urged, my voice laced with urgency as I struggled to pull her back toward the escape hatch. "We need to get out of here." Wanda's scarlet gaze remained fixed on the figure, her eyes shimmering with a complex blend of emotions as she ignored my hard tugs on the chain. I reached out and grabbed her arm, my fingers closing around her wrist with a tight grip that dug into her soft skin. But as I tried to drag her away, I felt a sudden surge of resistance from her body as she pulled and jerked her arm away from my touch. She turned her head toward me and her scarlet eyes bore into mine, her gaze intense as she wrenched her arm out of my grasp. "No," she whispered, her voice tinged with a strange, otherworldly determination. I can't leave. I still need to understand." Frustration and anger flared within me at her nonsensical blabber and show of defiance, and I tightened my hold on her leash and yanked on it hard, causing her to stumble backward as she resisted the pull. "Don't you ever say no to me, you little bitch," I insisted, trying to keep up my act so that she'd fall under my sway. "If you don't want to get hurt, you'll crash." A sudden loud noise rang out in the enclosed space, startling both of us as we returned our focus to the fight that was unfolding just a few feet away. Pietro's swift movements and the figure's powerful blows had created a frenzied dance of violence, a clash of strength and speed that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Pietro's fists moved with a frenetic energy, striking out at blurring speeds, while the figure's armored limbs moved with precision and force. But despite Pietro's remarkable agility and speed, it was clear that he was struggling to land a significant blow against his armored opponent. The figure's movements were calculated and efficient, each strike aimed at the fraction of a second when Pietro slowed to attack. The speedster zigzagged around the figure before instantly appearing at his side and throwing a punch at his midsection. But, in a split second, the figure's armored gauntlet shot forward, gripping Pietro's remaining hand and squeezing it with an inhuman strength. "Erg." Pietro's expression twisted with pain as a guttural cry escaped his lips, and his struggles intensified as he tried to break free from the figure's vice-like grip. I watched with a mixture of fear and anticipation as the figure's other hand, the one not restraining Pietro, slowly repositioned itself, fingers curling into a fist as it glowed with a faint but growing crimson energy. And then, with a sudden, explosive burst of power, the figure's fist struck Pietro's chest, releasing a shockwave of force that sent him hurtling through the air, crashing into the concrete wall with a sickening thud. Crash! Pietro collided with the wall with a bone-jarring impact, a spray of blood accompanying his collision as his body crumpled to the ground, his breath ragged and his body clearly battered and broken. He struggled to push himself up, his movements sluggish as he fought to regain his footing. "Pietro!" Wanda's voice rang out, her cry filled with anguish and desperation as she watched her brother's prone form. She tried to run toward him, but I pulled her back by the leash of the chain, making sure to keep her as a shield between me and that armored monster. The armored figure approached the fallen Pietro with measured steps, his crimson eyes fixed on his prey. Pietro's vacant gaze flicked up to meet the figure's, a mixture of pain and defiance in his eyes. "Stay down," the figure intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. It's over. Pietro's response was a stubborn glare as he weakly pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. Despite the odds, he seemed determined to continue fighting, his artificial loyalty and machine-like sense of duty propelling him forward even in the face of overwhelming defeat. The armored figure's response was a sigh, an almost weary expression crossing his skeletal visage. With a sudden motion, he raised his gauntleted fist, crimson energy crackling between the edges of the dark metal as he prepared to deliver a final, devastating blow to Pietro. Don't. Just as the armored figure's hand began to descend, a powerful surge of energy radiated through the corridor, the air itself seeming to vibrate with an otherworldly force. The armored figure paused mid-motion, his gaze shifting from Pietro to the source of this new energy. Don't. Please don't kill him. Wanda's voice echoed through the corridor, her tone carrying a weight of desperation that seemed to cut through the tension like a blade. Her scarlet eyes blazed with a newfound fire as she took a step forward, her stance firm and unwavering even as I kept my shaky hold of the other end of the now rigid chain. The words hung in the air, a command that seemed to carry an elemental force, a resonance that echoed through the very fabric of reality. The armored figure froze in place, his crimson eyes widening ever so slightly as he turned his gaze to Wanda. And, for the first time since his appearance here, he seemed to look at her, truly look at her, as if just now noticing her for the first time. She stood there, her scarlet eyes locked onto the figure, her presence exuding a sense of power as held up her pale face, which was caked in filth and blood. The air seemed to crackle with energy as the two of them stared at each other, their eyes burning with different but eerily similar shades of crimson and scarlet. The energy that had enveloped the corridor began to swirl around them, a maelstrom of crimson and scarlet that defied explanation. The two forces clashed and melded, creating an aura of tension that seemed to draw the very air between them. The figure's armor seemed to almost resonate with the energy that radiated from Wanda, a harmonious symphony of power that defied comprehension. Time seemed to stand still, the weight of the moment stretching out into eternity as their eyes were locked in an intense exchange, a silent conversation conducted that only they could understand. In that brief, suspended moment, the armored figure's aura of invincibility wavered, his defenses momentarily lowered as his gaze met Wanda's. It was a look that held a myriad of emotions, recognition, uncertainty, and a glimmer of something deeper that defied explanation. And then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the moment shattered. The figure's crimson eyes flickered, his stance shifting imperceptibly as he stepped back, his attention finally moving away from Wanda. A sense of awe washed over me as I watched this unprecedented exchange, a realization dawning on me that there might be a history between these two enigmatic beings that I could barely fathom, but maybe I could use it to my advantage. Pulling my thoughts back to the current situation, I watched as the armored figure returned his gaze toward Wanda's and, with a slight nod of his head, he acknowledged her plea, his movements deliberate as he stepped away from the fallen Pietro and began to walk past him toward Wanda and me. I inched back at his approach, trying to pull Wanda back with me, but she stood her ground, her scarlet eyes locked onto the approaching armored figure. Her stance remained resolute, a mix of determination and apprehension emanating from her as the maelstrom of energy that had enveloped the corridor began to fade around them. As the figure drew closer, I felt a renewed surge of panic and desperation. My carefully crafted plans were crumbling before me, and I was being rendered obsolete by the very forces I had sought to control. I couldn't allow this to happen. I needed to regain control of the situation, to assert my authority. Stop. I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of rage and fear. Don't come any closer. She's under my control. The armored figure's steps paused for a moment, and I seized the opportunity, my fingers fumbling with the remote control that connected to Pietro's cybernetic attachments. With a press of a button, a surge of electrical energy coursed through Pietro's body, his cybernetic enhancements activating with a jolt. Pietro's body convulsed, his limbs spasming as the cybernetic components overrode his nervous system, forcing him to his feet and driving him forward in a jerky, unnatural manner. He moved toward the figure, his movements stiff and mechanical, a puppet controlled by my will. The armored figure's gaze shifted to Pietro, his crimson eyes narrowing with a mix of recognition, as if he could see through the facade and could sense the manipulation I was trying to play. No. Wanda's voice rang out again, this time with an even stronger command, her power pulsating through the corridor like a shockwave. the dark scarlet energy swirling around her wanting to be released and used, but was luckily being stopped by the mutant gene inhibitor I built into her restraints. Pietro's struggles increased, his body shaking violently as he fought against the technology that held him in check. But it was clear that the cybernetic enhancements that coursed through Pietro's body were gradually overcoming his natural mental resistance as his broken and limp body struggled to move on its own. The armored figure's glowing crimson eyes shifted between me, Wanda, and Pietro, his expression an enigma that I couldn't decipher. It was as if he was processing something, weighing his options, and considering the implications of this unexpected turn of events. The armored figure remained silent for a moment, his gaze flickering between the three of us. His crimson eyes landed on Wanda's for a moment, and then he turned toward me. A brief, tense silence ensued as his piercing gaze bore into me and I felt paralyzed by his penetrating stare. Ha, ha ha, ha ha ha, the armored figure finally broke the silence, as he began to laugh to himself, amusement evident in the deep chuckle that rang out through the corridor, the sound jarring and strange coming from such an inhuman mouth. What a joke, he stated before exploding forward in a blur of motion that left me staring after him in a daze. He was upon me in the blink of an eye, his heavy gauntleted hand reaching forth and crushing the remote while I still clutched it in my hand. Bones crunching. Asterisk. AAAAARRRGGGGHHHHH. I shrieked, feeling as though my arm was being crushed in a press as both the remote and the bones in my hand were disintegrated into dust. The armored figure didn't stop there, however. He grabbed my neck with his other hand, squeezing it painfully tight. He lifted me off the ground, his grip making my lungs burn with exertion as he held me aloft with ease. "Ah, og," I gasped, struggling to break free from his powerful grasp. His cold gaze burned with crimson light as he looked down at me, seemingly unconcerned about the fact that he was holding my struggling body in the air. I struggled to speak, but the pressure on my throat prevented me from doing so. At that moment, all I wanted was to get away from him as fast as possible. Even though I knew that I wasn't strong enough to escape him, the idea of struggling in vain against him seemed preferable to remaining here. My brain processed that information as I desperately tried to formulate a plan, desperate to find a way out of this place and far away from this monster. "You know, this would almost be funny if you weren't so fucking pathetic," he said, shaking his head and letting go of me. "NNNG." I grunted, a blast of heat and pain washing over me as I slammed into the cold stone floor face first, my head ringing and my vision swam for a moment before returning to focus as I fought to take in a breath. I lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented, before pushing myself up onto my elbow and rolling over onto my back. My eyes widened in horror as I saw the armored figure standing above me, his crimson eyes gleaming with maniacal glee. "You didn't think we were done, did you?" he hissed, his voice cold and emotionless. Before I could respond, his armored foot came down on my chest, the weight of it pressing against me with a force that made my ribs creak and my breath catch in my throat. Agony shot through my body as I struggled to draw in air, my vision blurring with the pain and pressure. His boot pinned me to the ground, and I could feel the suffocating weight of his presence as he loomed over me. My heart raced in panic as the bones of my ribs creaked eerily under the slow force of his heavy boot, and a sense of helplessness washed over me, the realization that my power and influence meant nothing in the face of this overwhelming force. His armored hands reached down, fingers curling around my throat with a grip that threatened to crush the life out of me. His eyes bore into mine, looking at me as if the insignificance of my existence was a bother to him. "Not yet. Still not enough," he murmured to himself, his words a chilling promise that sent a shiver down my spine. As the pressure on my chest and throat increased, my vision began to blur, and the world around me seemed to fade into darkness. My struggle against his iron grip was futile, and the reality of my impending demise sank in. But just as the edges of consciousness were beginning to slip away, he let go of me abruptly. The release was so unexpected that I gasped for breath, my body convulsing as I drew in ragged gulps of air. I lay on the cold concrete, my chest heaving, feeling the sweat that had gathered on my brow mingling with the grit of the floor beneath me. As I struggled to regain my senses, I saw the armored figure step back, his crimson eyes still locked onto me, a mixture of disdain and something else that I couldn't quite place. With a final glance in my direction, the armored figure's presence seemed to diminish, his aura of power retracting like a fading storm. The maelstrom of energy that had surrounded him began to recede, tendrils of crimson light retreating like tendrils of mist before the dawn. The figure's armor seemed to shift, the chilling hum of power that had been a constant undercurrent quieting as the crimson glow that had pulsed within its lines dimmed. Slowly, piece by piece, the skeletal helmet around his head began to retract, receding into the back of the suit. As the helmet retracted, the face that emerged was not the visage of a grotesque monster or a soulless machine like I was expecting, but that of a young man, one with a familiar face that sent a shockwave of realization through me. The rugged features, hardened expression, and hazel eyes that held a cold determination, all of it coalesced into the image of someone I had once known, someone I had trained, someone I had thought was supposed to be dead. Brock Rumlow. I whispered, my voice tinged with a mix of astonishment and dread. Brock Rumlow's lips curved into a humorless smile, the expression a blend of amusement and something darker that lurked beneath the surface. He looked down at me, the weight of his gaze causing a chill to crawl down my spine. Drive Whitehall, he spoke, his voice low and raspy, carrying an air of authority that made it clear he was not a mere pawn in this game anymore. It's been a while. 2014. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. Lower basement level. Brock POV. Drive Whitehall. I greeted my old teacher as the dark metal of my helmet retracted into the back plate of my armor, and I looked down at him with a cold gaze. It's been a while. Dr. Whitehall's eyes narrowed, a look of astonishment, fear, and apprehension crossing his face as he gazed up at me. He struggled to push himself up from the cold concrete floor, his movements slow and pained. Despite the disheveled state of his appearance, the cunning intelligence that had made him a threat remained apparent as he took in my armored form, the dark crimson energy that emanated from my body, and the ominous air that hung over the room. Brock Rumlow. Is that really you? He muttered, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and unease. But, you're supposed to be dead. Pierce reported that you were killed in action. I couldn't help but smirk at his reaction. For years, I had lived in Hydra's shadow, biding my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Now, I stood before Dr. Whitehall, in control of my own destiny and future. In front of me was the man who had trained me to be one of the most ruthless soldiers in the world, the man who was responsible for turning me into what I am today. Afraid the reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated, I replied, my tone dripping with dark humor. Unfortunately for you, I'm alive and well. Whitehall's features twisted in anger as he glared up at me. His eyes scanned over my armored body once again, likely searching for the source of my inhuman strength and abilities. Impossible, he whispered, his voice quavering with envious rage. How is this possible? What happened to you? A sense of vindication washed over me as I watched Whitehall's composure crumble. For years, I had endured suffering at his hands, all in the name of Hydra's twisted ideals. Now, the tables had turned, and he was the one left trembling in fear. I stepped closer to him, my armored boots echoing ominously in the dimly lit corridor. Each movement was deliberate and calculated, as I loomed over his injured form, relishing in the fear that emanated from the man who had once been my mentor. Leaning down over Whitehall, I met his terrified gaze with a cold look of my own and smiled cruelly. What happened to me? I repeated his question, my voice low and chilling. I've become better than you ever could have imagined. I leaned close to him, smelling the strong stench of sweat and urine on his clothes. Whitehall's eyes widened in terror as I continued to tower over him, his trembling form trapped beneath my presence as his gaze darted around, as if searching for an escape route, but there was none. We were deep within the bowels of the Hydra research base, and I had ensured that no one would come to his aid. Look at me, I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper but still forcing Whitehall to turn towards me with a fearful gaze. You taught me everything I needed to know about control, manipulation, and how to break someone's spirit. You really tried your hardest to turn me into the perfect weapon, Dr. Whitehall. Well, congratulations, you succeeded. Crunch. Asterisk. AAAAAARRRRAAAGGH. The sound of Dr. Whitehall's agonized scream reverberated through the cold, dimly lit corridor as I applied pressure to his leg, the bones shattering beneath my boot. His features contorted in pain as he writhed beneath me, his cries for mercy falling on deaf ears. I leaned in closer, my voice a venomous whisper. Remember, doctor, all the tests and torture sessions, the countless hours you spent breaking me down, also that I could be the best I could be for Hydra. Well, now you see the results. Crunch. Asterisk. AAAAARRRRRAAAGGGHH. Dr. Whitehall let out another blood-curdling shriek as I crushed his other leg. He sobbed in pain, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stared up at me in horror as the broken remains of his legs looked like a flattened mess beneath my boot. Whitehall's breathing was ragged, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and something that resembled regret. He knew that there was no escaping the reckoning he now faced. I had orders, he stammered, his voice a mere whisper. I was just following orders from Hydra. None of it was personal. All of you were just a means to an end. Ha 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 ha, my laughter was harsh and devoid of any mirth. The age-old excuse of a coward. Just following orders, as if that absolves you of anything. Terror filled Dr. Whitehall's eyes as the realization that he had no way to escape this situation and that he was now at my mercy seemed to paralyze him, his struggles weakening as he lay there, broken and defeated. I raised my boot off his crushed leg, allowing him a brief respite from the pain, but the terror in his eyes remained as he gasped for breath. What do you want from me? He croaked, his voice a mere whisper, his arrogance and bravado reduced to nothing. I straightened up, my expression unyielding, and looked down at him with a mixture of satisfaction and contempt. Thought that was obvious by now. I want you to suffer. I want you to understand that fucking with me was the worst mistake you ever made in your pitiful life. Whitehall's gaze wavered as he tried to process my words, his mind undoubtedly racing to find a way out of this nightmarish scenario. But there was no escape, he was in my hands now, and I intended to make his death a long and painful one. I turned away from him, my eyes glancing back at the person whom I hadn't expected to be here. Wanda was kneeling at the side of her limp brother's body, her hand resting on his shoulder. She had been watching my exchange with Whitehall with a curious look, her scarlet eyes fixed on me with a mix of fascination and uncertainty. It was clear that she was struggling to make sense of the situation, to reconcile the image of the young man before her with the beast that had just torn this facility apart. Stay, I ordered back at the weeping and broken doctor lying at my feet as I approached the young woman, my footsteps echoing in the corridor. Wanda looked just like she did in the movies, though a bit younger, about early 20s, and without the makeup or costumes. Blood and dirt stained her face, tears streamed down her cheeks, and her long dark auburn hair was matted and tangled as it clung to her tear-stained cheeks. She looked like she had been through hell. Her scarlet eyes found mine, and instantly, I felt that same strange connection I felt earlier from the scarlet aura radiating off of her. It felt like a tether between us, a bond that existed before we even met. It was oddly familiar but also foreign. I couldn't explain it. Wanda didn't move as I approached, tears streaming from her eyes as she looked down at her brother, who appeared to be on his last breath. Pietro's chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths, his injuries severe and life-threatening. He's dying, Wanda whispered, her voice choked with grief as she caressed her brother's bloodied face. I knelt down beside Wanda, the frightening pressure that had once enveloped me receding, leaving me in my armored suit. Her scarlet gaze remained locked on her brother, her emotions a tumultuous storm. I studied Pietro's injuries, assessing the extent of the damage. It was clear that he was in critical condition, and time was running out. The battle had taken a toll on him, and the malfunctioning cybernetics that marred his body had left him on the brink of death. I reached out a gauntleted hand and gently placed it on Wanda's shoulder, my touch surprisingly gentle despite the imposing nature of my armor. The scarlet aura that radiated from her seemed to react to my presence, the energy pulsating and caressing around me in response. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice measured and calm. "I probably should have held back more in our fight." Tears continued to stream down her face as she looked up at me, her scarlet eyes filled with a mixture of grief, desperation, and something else that was harder to define. It was a look that held a glimmer of understanding, a spark of trust that seemed to transcend the chaos of the moment. Wanda shook her head, her voice a whisper. I don't blame you. It wasn't your fault." She began to cry again as she spoke, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The thing you fought. That wasn't my brother. It was some machine that sadistic old bastard put together." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I had sensed something off about her brother during our confrontation, but now the pieces were falling into place. Dr. Whitehall had tampered with Pietro's very being, turning him into a grotesque hybrid of man and machine. "You can't change what's already happened," I said, my tone softening despite the grim circumstances. "But you can choose how to move forward from here." Wanda looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for answers or perhaps solace. She was a young woman unwillingly thrust into a world of darkness and cruelty, and when I saw that look in her eyes it reminded me of Ava, Zuru, and myself. I gave her a small smile and nodded towards Pietro. "What do you want to do with him?" As I asked the question, Wanda's gaze shifted back to her brother, his breathing growing even shallower as he lay on the cold floor. Her scarlet eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she struggled to find the words to express her wishes. I want to save him," she finally said, her voice filled with anguish. "I want to help him, to undo what they've done to him. Please, can you help me?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she made her plea, her vulnerability laid bare before me. It was a stark contrast to the powerful abilities she possessed, a reminder that even the strongest among us had moments of weakness and desperation. Without hesitation, I reached out with my armored gauntlet and, with a quick, powerful motion, ripped off the inhibitor collars from her neck and hands, allowing her to access her powers. The shackles clattered to the ground, discarded remnants of her captivity as a surge of scarlet energy emanated from her, swirling around her like a protective cocoon. Wanda gasped as she felt the full extent of her powers returning to her, the sensation overwhelming and exhilarating. Her scarlet eyes blazed with newfound strength as she extended her quivering hands toward her brother, her fingers trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. The scarlet energy that radiated from her fingertips enveloped Pietro's broken form, its crimson glow casting an ethereal light over the scene. But just as she was about to unleash her powers to save her brother, Pietro's battered body seemed to respond. His chest heaved with a painful breath, and his pale lips moved as if struggling to form words. Wanda's scarlet aura faltered, her powers wavering as she turned her attention to her brother. She leaned in closer, her tears falling onto his bloodied face. Pietro," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Pietro's hand, weak and trembling, rose ever so slightly, his fingers brushing against Wanda's cheek in a gesture of frailty and farewell. His vacant eyes, once vibrant with life, looked up at his sister, conveying a silent message. Wanda's eyes widened in realization, and her tears flowed freely as she understood her brother's unspoken request. She nodded, her voice choked with grief as she began to speak. I understand. I'll let you go," she whispered, her words barely audible. "I won't make you suffer anymore." With those words, Wanda released her grip on her brother's broken form. The scarlet energy surrounding Pietro faded, and his breathing grew even more labored. He mustered a weak smile, his gaze fixed on his sister with a mixture of love and gratitude. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, Pietro Maximoff, the once fierce speedster, and Wanda's beloved twin brother, closed his eyes for the last time. Wanda let out a heart-wrenching cry, her anguish echoing through the cold, dimly lit corridor. She cradled her brother's lifeless body in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks as she held him close, her scarlet aura flickering with grief and loss. I stood nearby, my gaze averted out of respect for the painful moment unfolding before me. Wanda's grief was palpable, her world shattered by the loss of her brother. Returning to Dr. Whitehall, I found him in a state of agony, his broken body racked with pain and fear. He had witnessed the death of the Maximoff twin, the very individual he had subjected to unspeakable cruelty and experimentation. As I loomed over him once more, a cruel smile crossed my lips. "Now, where we?" Whitehall's eyes were filled with terror as he looked up at me, the realization of his impending fate sinking in. I reached down and grabbed him by the collar of his blood-soaked lab coat, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. His feeble struggles were futile, and his cries for mercy fell on deaf ears. "Pete, please," he begged, his voice a desperate whimper. "Have mercy." I leaned in close, my voice a menacing whisper. "Mercy. You showed me none. You tortured me, manipulated me, and forced me to kill something I loved. Now, it's your turn to experience the same pain." With that, I unleashed my wrath upon Dr. Whitehall, subjecting him to a torment that mirrored the suffering he had caused. The echoes of his screams filled the corridor, a chilling symphony of retribution. Blood, bone, and viscera splattered across the walls as I slowly broke every bone in his body, one by one. Every nerve ending was exposed to the air, screaming in agony as they burned and shrieked. The sound echoed throughout the facility, and I could feel the tremors of fear and pain reverberate through the concrete walls. Dr. Whitehall tried to plead for forgiveness, to beg for his life, but all of his attempts were drowned out by the agonized wails of his own body. As I continued to exact my revenge, I couldn't help but glance back at Wanda, who still clung to her brother's lifeless form, but her scarlet eyes were fixated on my work as she watched Whitehall's slow and brutal demise. Grief and rage warred within her, her emotions raw and unfiltered as she stared at her former captor. The energy around her fluctuated and changed in response to her volatile emotions, the red haze surrounding her becoming more intense, almost blinding. I paused in my assault on the doctor, throwing his broken and bleeding body to the floor between me and the young woman. Wanda's confused gaze shifted from Dr. Whitehall to me, her scarlet eyes filled with a mixture of fury and confusion. "Want to turn?" I asked, a mischievous grin tugging at the corners of my lips. Wanda looked hesitant for a long moment, and then her eyes burned with hatred as she pulled herself to her feet. Her expression hardened as she glared at Dr. Whitehall, who was twitching in the middle of the hall, a pool of his own blood gathering around his unmoving form. Wanda struck out her hand and scarlet tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Whitehall's body like chains. As the tendrils tightened around him, I could see the doctor struggle underneath them, his thrashing movements becoming more frantic and violent as time wore on. Grotesque sounds of broken bones and torn flesh sounded as Dr. Whitehall continued to flail beneath the coils, his convulsions growing weaker by the second until he went limp altogether. Wanda withdrew her tendrils, letting Dr. Whitehall, or what was left of him, slump to the ground in a heap of bloody mess. It looked as if she had just forced his body to turn inside out. Every bodily orifice was exposed, and his loose skin sagged off his body in several places, revealing the layers of muscle and sinew beneath. His eyes were wide open, glassy, and staring. His tongue hung out of the side of his gaping mouth, which was stained with a dark ooze that dripped from his slack jaw. His body was a gruesome study in desecration. Holy shit, I said, my voice heavy with shock and awe as I stepped closer to get a better look at the mangled body that was surprisingly still breathing. Wanda stood there, panting heavily, her scarlet aura slowly subsiding as she looked down at the grotesque result of her powers. Her chest heaved with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction, the emotion swirling within her scarlet eyes. I glanced at her, a mixture of curiosity and admiration in my gaze. Her abilities were far more formidable than I had initially realized, capable of inflicting such gruesome devastation. It was a stark reminder that beneath her grief and vulnerability lay a formidable force to be reckoned with. Turning my attention back to the mangled form of Dr. Whitehall, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of closure while looking at the man who had met a fittingly gruesome fate. "Nice work," I remarked, my voice carrying a tone of genuine respect as I looked at Wanda. "I'd say he got what he deserved. I'm actually surprised you didn't kill him." Wanda didn't respond immediately, her scarlet eyes still fixed on the lifeless, contorted body before her. She seemed lost in her thoughts, grappling with the weight of her actions. Finally, she turned to me, her scarlet gaze meeting mine. There was a haunted look in her eyes, a recognition of the darkness within herself that she had just unleashed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and sorrow as tears streamed down her face. "For helping me, for everything." I nodded in acknowledgement, moving forward to place a hand on her shoulder. She flinched a bit at my touch, but she did not pull away. Instead, she turned toward me and looked up at my face, her expression one that I was all too familiar with. We were both products of a cruel and unforgiving world, shaped by the choices of others, and in that moment, we found a strange camaraderie in our shared pain. Beep, 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 asterisk. The touching scene was suddenly interrupted as my comlink sounded, pulling me back to reality. With a heavy sigh, I answered the call, hearing Zeru's excited voice crackling over the line. "Boss, it's almost time," he exclaimed, his excitement palpable in his tone. "Cap and the others have infiltrated one of the corrupted helicarriers, and are making their way to the terminal as we speak." A quick glance at my watch confirmed what he had told me. It was almost time for the fireworks to start flying. "All right, you and Ava meet me in front of the facility with our spoils," I ordered. "Copy that. We'll rendezvous at the extraction point," Zuru replied. "See ya soon." I hung up the line and sighed again, glancing over at Wanda, whose eyes were still fixed on her brother's corpse. Her scarlet aura had subsided, leaving her looking drained and emotionally exhausted. We had lingered here long enough, and it was time to leave this place behind. It's time to go, I announced to the young woman as I extended a hand towards her, a silent offer hanging in the air. Wanda hesitated for a moment, her scarlet eyes meeting mine. She looked into my eyes for a long second, searching for something, before finally, with a sad smile, she took my offered hand, allowing me to help her to her feet. Her grip was firm, and as she stood, she seemed to find a newfound resolve. I have no place else to go, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears that still glistened in her eyes. Then you're coming with us, I said firmly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. We have a way out of here, and once we're clear, you can decide what you want to do next. Wanda nodded, her scarlet eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and determination. She looked back down at her brother's body and, with a wave of her hand, she used her powers to gently lift Pietro's lifeless form from the cold, blood-stained floor. It was a solemn yet tender gesture, a final farewell to the brother she had lost in the most tragic of circumstances. I want to give him a proper burial, one far away from this horrible place. She said, her voice wavering with emotion. He deserves at least that. I nodded in agreement, turning around to grab the wet gasping mass of flesh that was now Dr. Whitehall, who shrieked out painfully as his exposed flesh was roughly grasped by my gauntleted fingers. I carried Dr. Whitehall's body in my hand like a bag of luggage as Wanda followed behind me with Pietro cradled in her scarlet energy. We began to make our way towards the exit of the dimly lit corridor, our footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor. As we emerged from the corridor into the larger underground complex, I couldn't help but notice a large cage off to the side of the hall. I had walked past it before, its presence overshadowed by the dramatic events unfolding around us. But my curiosity got the better of me this time, and I stopped in front of it with interest. The cage was massive, its metal bars dark and foreboding. Grr. Asterisk. A low growl emanated from within the darkness of the cage as a pair of glowing green eyes appeared within the gloom, staring out at me. They blinked slowly, lazily, and then turned away once more, taking in the sights around them. This trip just keeps getting more and more fruitful, I mumbled under my breath, dropping Whitehall to the floor and reaching out to touch the cage as I was intrigued by the creature inside of it. You're not thinking of taking that thing with us, are you? Wanda asked uncertainly, her voice betraying her unease as she looked at the beast caged in front of her. It looks dangerous. I considered that question, before turning around and giving her a wry smirk. One thing you'll learn about me real fast, Wanda, I replied with a mischievous tone, is that I love collecting dangerous things. With that, I pulled the metal bars apart with ease and stepped into the large cage to confront the beast lying within. 2014. Washington, D.C. Project Insight Helicourier. Omniscient POV. As Brock was busy finishing up his business with the last of the remaining personnel of the Hydra research base, Captain America, Falcon, and Black Widow worked to bring down Secretary Pierce and his hijacked helicouriers. With the help of the newly revealed alive Nick Fury, Black Widow focused on infiltrating the heavily guarded Triskelion to eliminate Pierce and his crew of Hydra soldiers. Captain America and Falcon, on the other hand, had made their way inside one of the Project Insight helicouriers. The tension in the air was palpable as they navigated the tight corridors, their footsteps echoing in the metallic confines. The sounds of distant gunfire and explosions reverberated through the helicourier, a testament to the fierce battle raging outside between S.H.I.E.L.D. loyalists and Hydra operatives. The fate of the world hung in the balance, with the helicarrier's massive guns poised to strike their intended targets. Finally, Cap and Falcon reached the control terminal they were looking for. Cap's gloved hand clenched around the small device Brock had entrusted to him. It was their only hope to stop the helicouriers and prevent the catastrophic loss of innocent lives. With a determined expression, he inserted the device into the terminal. As he did so, lines of code began to flash across the screen. Cap's eyes narrowed in concentration as he watched the digital display. "That should do it, Sam," Cap said to Falcon, determination in his eyes. "Now that we've shut these things down, we go after Bucky." Falcon nodded, his wings twitching with anticipation. They both knew that the success of their mission could mean the difference between life and death for countless innocent people. Lines of code began to flash across the screen at a rapid pace as Cap watched the monitor intently, focusing on the lines of code and trying to decipher its purpose. To his eyes, the device seemed to be working, but as he turned to leave with Falcon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. "Cap, we need to keep moving," Falcon exclaimed, the sound of his voice breaking Cap out of his trance. Captain America's instincts kicked in, and he nodded at Falcon. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. Together, they started to make their way back through the labyrinthine passages of the helicarrier, their steps quick and purposeful. But as they left the control room, the lines of code on the screen continued to move faster, almost as if they had taken on a life of their own. Unbeknownst to Cap, the small device he had inserted was not just shutting down the helicarriers, it was spreading a virus deep into the network, infiltrating the helicarrier's targeting systems. In Washington, D.C., the Project Insight helicarrier hovered ominously in the sky, its massive guns aimed at various targets across the city. Inside, the lines of code on the control terminal screen blinked faster and faster, like a digital storm brewing. Suddenly, the screens in the control room lit up with an ominous purple glow. Alarms blared, and the helicarrier's crew scrambled to regain control. "What's happening?" one of the pilots of the helicarrier asked, his voice filled with panic as he lost all control over the flight systems. His words were drowned out by another warning from the computer system, which was now spewing out warnings across the entire network. Inside the control room, the lines of code on the screen were now a blur, and the virus had taken hold. The helicarrier's targeting systems were being reprogrammed, and in a matter of moments, the massive barrels of the helicarrier's guns began to adjust their positioning, shifting their aim from the city below to a different set of targets. The crew members stared in horror as the once steady and precise targeting systems went haywire, their screens glitching as they showed new destinations. In the chaos that ensued, Secretary Pierce, who had been confident in his complete control over everything that was happening, now found himself desperately panicking in his office as the screen he was monitoring showed that they had lost command of the helicarriers. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, his voice filled with anger and frustration. But he was already too late. The virus had wormed its way deep into the Hydra's systems, and their guns were now locked onto a new set of coordinates that had been meticulously programmed by the virus's brilliant mutant creator, Zuru. The tension in the control room was palpable as the helicarrier's crew members desperately tried to regain control. The screens continued to display the new, unexpected targets, and the massive guns of the helicarrier slowly shifted their aim, now pointing not at innocent civilians in Washington, D.C., but at the very people that had put this plan into motion. Meanwhile, Captain America and Falcon raced through the corridors of the helicarrier, unaware of the chaos unfolding around them. Cap's singular focus was on finding and capturing Bucky Barnes, the man he once knew as a friend, who was being used as a deadly weapon by HYDRA's brainwashing. As they made their way closer to Bucky's location, the floor beneath them suddenly trembled, and the walls reverberated with the sound of the helicarrier's massive guns firing. The deafening roar of the helicarrier's guns echoed through the corridors, causing Captain America and Falcon to stagger. The sudden explosion of noise and vibration sent shockwaves through their bodies. "What the hell was that?" Falcon shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Cap's eyes widened as he realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The helicarrier shouldn't be firing. They were supposed to be shutting down. Panic gripped his heart as he feared the worst. "We need to get to the Contro." Cap's words were cut short as they both staggered from another violent tremor. The floor rumbled beneath them, and the walls vibrated again. Outside, the massive guns of the helicarrier fired at a speed that belied their immense size, the virus that was controlling them overclocking the mechanics of the armaments as the helicarrier's cannons fired relentlessly, sending a barrage of long-range bullets and missiles that spread out like a giant spiderweb, striking down every target they were pointed at with pinpoint accuracy. The hundreds of undercover Hydra operatives fighting with SHIELD on the ground below were caught completely unawares as they were suddenly struck dead by the massive firepower that rained down upon them. Buildings collapsed, glass shattered, and debris flew across the cityscape in a matter of moments as even unsuspecting people were abruptly killed by the onslaught of death poured down from the three massive helicarriers that were steadily climbing in altitude. The entire city of Washington, D.C. was rocked senseless by the destruction unleashed upon it, but as the helicarriers reached a certain altitude above the city, the armaments began to fire further out into the open skies, sending their deadly payloads past Washington, D.C. streaking towards the surrounding cities. All throughout America, Buildings burned and crumpled as thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians were indiscriminately killed by the relentless assault. In the blink of an eye, America suffered what would be later seen as an unprecedented act of terrorism. The world seemed to stand still for a moment as Captain America and Falcon, deep within the helicarrier, felt the tremors and heard the deafening roars of destruction. They exchanged a horrified look, realization dawning upon them that the helicarriers were still active, and were now carrying out their intended purpose. "Did we fail to stop it?" Cap whispered, his voice filled with anguish. The weight of the catastrophe that had just been unleashed hung heavy in the air. Captain America and Falcon stood in stunned disbelief as the chaos and destruction unleashed by the helicarriers continued to ripple across the sky and ground. The once clear skies were now filled with smoke, fire, and debris as the barrage of long-range artillery struck targets not just in Washington, D.C. but far beyond, reaching into neighboring territories. The world had descended into chaos as the helicarrier's deadly payloads found their marks and pounded everything in their path. The helicarrier they were on continued its ascent, joining the other two in their deadly barrage of destruction. The world watched in horror as the United States became the epicenter of devastation. Smoke and fire billowed from the impacted cities, and the full scope of the disaster was unfathomable. The deafening roars of the helicarrier's guns continued to reverberate through the metallic corridors, as the shockwaves of the bombardment rocked the helicarrier, making it increasingly difficult for Cap and Falcon to maintain their balance. "We have to stop this," Cap said with a determined look in his eyes, his sense of responsibility driving him forward. "We need to find a way to regain control and minimize the damage." Falcon nodded in agreement, his wings twitching with anticipation. They had to make things right, even if it meant risking their lives to do so. They turned and raced back toward the control room, their footsteps echoing through the now chaotic corridors. Smoke billowed from damaged sections of the helicarrier, and emergency alarms blared in the background. As they re-entered the control room, chaos reigned. Crew members frantically attempted to override the virus's commands, but the virus had locked them out of their own systems. Outside the helicarrier, the barrage of destruction continued. The sky was painted with fiery streaks as the long-range artillery pounded targets in the United States and its neighboring countries. The world watched in horror, and the consequences of Project Insight were now an unimaginable reality. The helicarrier shuddered again as it released one last volley of long-range artillery fire, the massive guns firing with deadly accuracy, before the repulsor tech engines suddenly faltered, and the mighty helicarrier abruptly began to descend toward the ground along with the other two helicarriers. The sudden descent was rapid and uncontrolled, a stark contrast to their earlier ascent. The once mighty war machines now plummeted from the sky like wounded birds, their engines sputtering and failing. Inside the control room, Cap and Falcon rushed to the terminal, desperately trying to regain control of the helicarrier. Sweat dripped down Cap's brow as he worked feverishly to access the system, but the ingenious virus had already woven itself deep into the network and locked everyone else out of the system, making his amateurish efforts to bypass it a pointless waste of time. "Cap, we need to get out of here," Falcon said, his voice unwavering despite the chaos around them. Cap shook his head, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he tried to access the control systems. "We have to find a way to override the systems and bring these helicarriers down safely," he whispered, determination etched into his features. He couldn't let the helicarriers crash into populated areas and cause even more devastation. But as seconds turned into minutes, it became increasingly clear that their efforts were in vain. The virus had complete control, and the helicarrier continued its rapid descent, hurtling toward the ground below. Falcon grabbed Cap by the arm, his grip firm. "Steve, there's no time. We need to get out of here before this thing crashes." Captain America hesitated for a moment, torn between his sense of duty and the grim reality of their situation. The helicarrier was hurtling toward the ground, and there was no guarantee they could regain control in time to prevent a catastrophic crash. With a heavy heart, Cap reluctantly nodded, and they turned to leave the control room. The once mighty war machine was now a plummeting behemoth, and there was no stopping its descent. Together, they sprinted through the now chaotic corridors, dodging falling debris and struggling to maintain their footing as the helicarrier plummeted. With each passing moment, the ground grew closer, and the impending crash became inevitable. The world outside the windows was a blur of motion as the helicarrier hurtled toward the earth. Finally, They reached an emergency exit, and without hesitation, Cap and Falcon activated it. The hatch blew open, and they were greeted by the rushing wind and the terrifying sight of the ground rapidly approaching. With a final glance back at the out-of-control helicarrier, Captain America and Falcon leapt into the open air, their bodies plummeting toward the ground. The world around them was a whirlwind of chaos and destruction as they free fall for a moment before Falcon spread his wings and grabbed Cap under his arms. Together, they soared through the sky safely, their minds racing with the magnitude of what had just transpired. In the distance, 2 of the 3 helicarriers had already crashed into the ocean, their massive forms sinking deep beneath the water and causing massive waves and devastation along the coastlines. But the one they had been on continued its uncontrolled descent, heading straight for Washington, D.C., the heart of the nation's capital. Cap and Falcon exchanged a grim look, knowing that they had no other choice. They couldn't allow the helicarrier to crash into the city and cause even more death and destruction. With each passing moment, the ground rushed closer, and the impending crash became inevitable. Cap and Falcon soared behind the falling mass of metal, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had failed to prevent this disaster. The city of Washington, D.C. loomed below, and the helicarrier's massive frame cast a dark shadow over the nation's capital. But, before the helicarrier could make its devastating impact on Washington, D.C., a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. Suddenly, hundreds of automated Iron Man suits, each equipped with various forms of advanced technology, emerged from the sky like a flock of metallic birds. These suits, controlled remotely by Tony Stark, soared toward the falling helicarrier, forming a protective barrier between the plummeting helicarrier and the city it threatened to destroy. The Iron Man suits each grabbed hold of the massive ship, their repulsor thrusters flaring with power as they pushed against its wide hull, stabilizing the helicarrier's descent and slowing its rapid fall. They worked in perfect unison, their collective strength defying gravity as they held the massive vessel aloft. Captain America and Falcon, still in freefall, watched in awe and relief as the various Iron Man suits used their advanced technology to stabilize the helicarrier. It hung suspended in the air, a colossal behemoth that loomed ominously over the city below, as the Iron Man suits continued to hold it up. With a powerful coordinated effort, the mechanical suits gently lowered the helicarrier to the ground, ensuring that it touched down safely in an open area, away from populated buildings. The impact was still substantial, causing the ground to shake, but the city was spared from the devastation that would have occurred if the helicarrier had crashed into its heart. Captain America and Falcon landed safely nearby, their hearts heavy with the weight of what had transpired. The chaos had subsided, and the Iron Man suits stood as guardians, protecting the city from further harm. As they approached the downed helicarrier, Captain America couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and regret. They had prevented the worst-case scenario, but not without causing significant damage and loss of life. The world will never forget this day. Tony Stark's voice came over a loudspeaker, resonating from the Iron Man suits. "Cap, you okay down there?" "We're all right, Tony," Cap replied, gratitude in his voice. "Thanks for the save." Stark's voice was tinged with humor as he replied. "Always happy to help. By the way, who's the guy with the metal chicken wings?" "New sidekick." Captain America couldn't help but smile beneath his cowl. "This is Sam Wilson, also known as Falcon. He's more than a sidekick, he's a true hero." Falcon nodded in agreement, his wings folding gracefully behind him. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stark." Tony Stark's voice held a note of amusement. "Well, let's save all the introductions for later. We've got a lot of cleanup to do, and a world to reassure." As Captain America and Falcon joined the effort to secure the area and provide assistance to those in need, they couldn't shake the sense of responsibility for the chaos that had unfolded. The consequences of Project Insight would linger for a long time, but for now, they would focus on helping those affected and ensuring that such a catastrophe would never happen again. "Cap, Falcon, what's your status?" Black Widow's voice crackled over their communicators. "We're safe," Cap replied. "Thanks to Tony and his suits." Black Widow's relief was evident in her voice. "Good. We need to regroup and assess the situation. Pierce and his forces have been neutralized, meaning Hydra's been dealt a significant blow, but there's still work to be done." Captain America nodded, his sense of duty as strong as ever. "We'll be right there, Nat." As the heroes regrouped and assessed the situation, the world watched, a mixture of relief and shock washing over them. The helicarriers had been stopped, but the cost had been high. SHIELD and other government agencies would have to pick up the pieces, deal with the aftermath, and answer to the public for the destruction that had occurred. Around the world, news of the chaos and destruction spread like wildfire as many different governments and agencies scrambled to respond, while citizens tried to come to terms with the unimaginable events that had unfolded. Questions were raised about the responsibility for the devastation and who would be held accountable. In different corners of the world, 3 of the 5 heads of Hydra, Baron von Strucker, Johann Fenhoff, and Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, had been successfully taken out by the Helicourier's surprise attack. Baron von Strucker, who had been overseeing a hidden Hydra base in Eastern Europe, was struck unaware as the Helicourier's massive guns unleashed their deadly payload, and the base he was in was obliterated in a fiery explosion. Baron von Strucker had no chance to escape. Johann Fenhoff, another prominent Hydra figure, was in South America, coordinating with Hydra operatives in the region. The Helicourier's barrage of firepower struck the compound where he was located, reducing it to rubble. Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, one of HYDRA's high-ranking agents, was operating covertly in Asia. The Helicourier's long-range ordnance found its target there as well, decimating the Hydra facility where Fontaine was hiding. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the remaining Hydra ranks, leaving them demoralized and leaderless. The world began to breathe a sigh of relief as it became clear that the threat of Hydra had been dealt a significant blow. However, 2 of the 5 heads of Hydra, Tomi Shizudo and Loxia's Crown, had survived the surprise attack thanks to their inhuman abilities. Tomi Shizudo, a.k.a. the Gorgon, known for his enhanced regenerative abilities, had managed to withstand the onslaught and swiftly made his escape, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Loxia's Crown, the enigmatic and elusive leader of HYDRA's occult division, on the other hand, used a different method as he possessed a unique power of precognition. As the Helicourier's ordnance struck the facility where he had been conducting mysterious experiments, his foresight granted him a split-second advantage, allowing him to teleport to safety just as the first salvo of destruction struck. He reappeared in a hidden, remote location, far from the chaos and devastation. With Baron von Strucker, Johann Fenhoff, and Valentina Allegra de Fontaine eliminated and Tomi Shizudo and Loxia's Crown forced to go into hiding, Hydra found itself fractured and in disarray. The organization's leadership had been severely crippled, and its remaining operatives were left to fend for themselves in a world that was growing increasingly aware and hostile to their cause. While the world grappled with the questions of how and why these events happened, the media seized upon the opportunity to throw a spotlight on SHIELD, which suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny from the public at large. They pounced on every mistake, controversy, or misstep that SHIELD might have committed during this crisis, and there were calls for dismantling SHIELD's entire operations and bringing everything back under the control of the U.S. government. While a few people accepted Captain America's explanation regarding the nature of the incident and how they had failed to stop it in time, others were unwilling to give them the benefit of the doubt. As the world went wild with speculation and conspiracy theories about what really happened, one thing was certain: the true culprits behind this debacle had yet to be identified. And the one man who could shed light on the truth was blissfully ignorant of his own involvement. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Sokovia Hydra Research Base. A few minutes before the Helicourier's bombardment. Back at the Hydra Research Base in Sokovia, Ava and Zuru stood in the courtyard, their muted gray leather armor and sleek silver exosuit a stark contrast to the hundreds of bloody dismembered corpses piled up around them. As Ava and Zuru waited in the courtyard, the tension in the air was palpable. The aftermath of their daring raid on the Hydra Research Base left them with a sense of accomplishment mixed with weariness. Ava's muted gray leather armor bore scuffs and marks from the intense battle, and she adjusted a strap on her shoulder as she scanned the surroundings, her sharp eyes vigilant for any signs of trouble. Zuru, in his sleek silver exosuit, looked equally battle-worn but determined. His fingers tapped on the interface of his suit as he monitored incoming data and kept an eye on the perimeter. Ruby's metallic corpse as well as the rest of the other loot they had gathered from the base was piled nearby, waiting to be secured. As they chatted in low voices, discussing their next steps and how to handle the stolen Hydra data, something caught Ava's attention and she nodded toward the entrance of the research base. They both turned their gaze toward the doorway, expecting to see Brock emerging from the facility. However, what they saw surprised them. Walking out of the base was Brock, as expected, but he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was a young woman with dark auburn hair that seemed to glow in the dim evening light. She was dirty and disheveled but undeniably beautiful. Her inhuman scarlet eyes were sharp, and there was a determined look on her face. But what truly caught both their attention was the massive, dark green hound that padded out closely behind both of them. The creature was about the size of a horse, with powerful muscles rippling beneath its wavy emerald fur. It moved with a grace that belied its size, and its intelligent eyes held a spark of something more than mere animal instinct. Ava and Zuru exchanged bewildered glances before turning their attention back to the unexpected arrivals. It seemed that this mission had more surprises in store for them than they had ever anticipated. Brock approached them with a smile, his gaze shifting between the two as he dropped something to the ground that they had just now noticed he was carrying in his hand. It looked like some kind of grotesque mass of flesh and organs, but from the light wet sobbing coming from the thing's mouth, it seemed to be alive. "What the hell is that?" Ava asked, feeling disgusted and repulsed by the sight of the squirming mass. "This is Dr. Whitehall, or at least what's left of him after our little encounter," Brock explained. His words sent a shiver down Ava's spine. She had heard of Dr. Whitehall, one of HYDRA's most notorious scientists known for his cruel experiments. It was hard to believe that the grotesque, writhing mass at their feet was once the same man. Seeing him reduced to this kind of state was both unsettling and oddly satisfying. "What happened to him?" Zuru inquired, his voice tinged with curiosity. Brock's eyes flickered with a mix of amusement and grim satisfaction. "He just got a small taste of his own medicine," he stated cryptically. Ava turned her gaze from the abomination at her feet to Brock. "You did this?" Brock shook his head. "I won't go into the gory details, let's just say our new friend here is pretty powerful," he said, gesturing to the young woman who had followed him out of the base. Wanda stepped forward, her scarlet eyes studying Ava and Zuru with a mix of caution and curiosity. Hello," she said softly, her Sokovian accent thick as she spoke. "I'm Wanda Maximoff." She extended her hand toward them in greeting. Ava glanced at Brock, then back at Wanda before taking her offered hand. "Ghost, but I guess you can call me Ava." "Nice to meet you," Wanda replied, releasing Ava's hand and turning toward Zuru, who had lost all interest in the strange woman as he stared wide-eyed at the massive hound that had been sniffing the ground and the air around Ava and Zuru with a sense of curiosity. "What is he?" Zuru asked, looking up at Brock with childish curiosity. "I've never seen a green dog before, let alone one that huge." Brock chuckled and scratched his unshaven chin. "Not too sure about that. Easy to tell that he's a product of some kind of experiment that Dr. Whitehall had going, but I don't know exactly what they were doing to him," he said as he let out a low whistle, making the large animal perk up and trot closer to him. The hound came right up to Brock and put its muzzle right against his cheek, its hot breath tickling his skin as he reached out and petted its snout. "I've tamed him to some extent, but be warned, he's not friendly and he does bite," he cautioned them. As if to emphasize Brock's words, the massive hound suddenly pounced at Zuru, who had been inching closer to get a better look at the creature. The attack was swift, but before the hound's jaws could close around Zuru, Brock's reflexes kicked in. With lightning speed, Brock's hand shot out, and he slammed the beast's head to the ground with a swift and precise motion, his palm pressing down on the creature's snout. The hound whimpered, its growl turning into a submissive whine as it lay on the ground, subdued. Brock admonished the massive hound as if it were a small puppy, his voice firm but not unkind. "No. Bad dog. We don't attack unless I say so." The hound whined in response, its long tail tucked between its legs as it backed away, chastened. Wanda approached the massive animal cautiously, extending her palm slowly to his head as a faint scarlet glow emanated from her fingertips, and, after a moment, the beast seemed to relax in her hand as she stroked his head. Ava and Zuru exchanged incredulous glances. The sudden display of control and dominance over the massive beast left them speechless. Brock gave Wanda an approving nod. "Looks like he's taken a liking to you." Wanda looked up at him and smiled, her scarlet eyes fixed on his. "I've always had a way with monsters," she said coyly as the two of them shared a knowing look, their connection evident even to the onlookers. Ava cleared her throat, breaking the momentary silence. "All right then, we have a mutated scientist turned blob of flesh, a giant green, dog, and a new member who can apparently alter both at will. Anything else we should know about? Brock nodded, shifting his attention back to the mission at hand. Yeah, we need to get out of here. The fireworks will be heading this way soon. Wanda furrowed her brow in confusion. Fireworks. Brock grinned mischievously and pointed up at the darkening sky. As Brock pointed, Wanda followed his gesture and she noticed something in the distance. Bright streaks of light, like huge fireflies, were beginning to light up the evening sky. They were beautiful, with their vivid colors and mesmerizing patterns, but Wanda quickly realized that these were no ordinary fireworks. Everyone else followed their gaze and saw something that left them awestruck. High above, 3 massive, sleek shells of metal glided through the atmosphere, leaving trails of fiery exhaust in their wake. "Oh, that's what you mean," Wanda exclaimed, her voice filled with a mix of awe and concern, realizing that the beautiful display in the sky was actually a deadly barrage of long-range artillery, and it was closing in on their location. The 3 objects in the sky were none other than the long-range projectiles shot from the 3 Project Insight helicarriers, primed and armed to unleash destruction on their target, the sobbing mass of flesh lying at their feet. Brock turned his gaze from the descending artillery to the people around him, his expression still relaxed as ever. "We should probably get out of here before they come crashing down on us," he said simply, his nonchalant tone belied by the seriousness of the situation. Ava, Wanda, and Zuru nodded in agreement, realizing the imminent danger they were in. With a gesture, Brock signaled the Hound to follow him and, without wasting any more time, the group moved quickly, leaving the moaning blob of flesh in the middle of the courtyard as they grabbed their loot and headed for their ride. As they stored their spoils and all piled into the hovercar, it became evident that space was limited. The vehicle was designed for a smaller group, and now it had to accommodate Brock, Wanda, Ava, Zuru, and the massive Hound. It was a tight fit, but there was no other choice. Brock took the driver's seat, Ava and Wanda sat beside him, while Zuru and the Hound squeezed into the back seats. The engine of the hovercar hummed to life, and it lifted off the ground, hovering just above the courtyard. Outside the hovercar's transparent canopy, the descent of the artillery shells continued, their fiery trails drawing closer with each passing moment. The once beautiful streaks of light now seemed like ominous harbingers of destruction. Brock glanced at the control panel and quickly plotted a course that would take them away from the impending impact zone. The hovercar shot forward, its powerful thrusters propelling them through the air. The massive Hound, sensing the urgency, hunkered down in the backseat, its massive frame slowly shrinking within the confines of the vehicle. The hovercar shot forward, narrowly avoiding the deadly projectiles that streaked past them. The air around them crackled with energy as the shells detonated, sending shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere. Debris and fiery plumes erupted in their wake, but the hovercar continued its desperate flight, weaving through the chaos. Brock's skillful piloting was the only thing keeping them from being obliterated by the relentless barrage. He expertly navigated the hovercar through the deadly onslaught, his focus unwavering. As they raced away from the Hydra research base, the destructive artillery shells continued their pursuit, but Brock managed to maintain a slight lead. The hovercar's advanced technology allowed it to outmaneuver the projectiles with precision. Wanda's scarlet eyes glowed with a faint ethereal light as she extended her hand toward the artillery shells, her powers awakening. With a subtle gesture, she exerted her influence on the projectiles, subtly altering their trajectories. The artillery shells veered off course, missing the hovercar by mere inches. Boom! Asterisk. The world outside the hovercar's canopy was a chaotic blur of explosions and destruction as the projectiles struck the ground of the research base, creating massive craters and sending shockwaves rippling through the terrain. "Hold on," Brock shouted to his companions as he skillfully guided the hovercar through the chaos. "We'll be out of this mess soon." Boom! Asterisk. Ava, Wanda, and Zuru hunkered down in their seats, their hearts pounding in their chests as they trusted Brock to get them to safety. The massive Hound, despite its size, seemed remarkably calm, its intelligent eyes focused on the world outside the canopy. The hovercar continued its breakneck pace, weaving and dodging through the storm of destruction. The projectiles from the helicarriers were relentless, but Brock's piloting skills proved to be their saving grace. Boom! Asterisk. As they finally cleared the danger zone and left the fiery chaos behind, a collective sigh of relief swept through the hovercar. The world outside began to return to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of the devastation they had narrowly escaped lingered in their minds. Brock gradually slowed the hovercar's speed, allowing everyone to catch their breath. He glanced at his passengers and gave them a reassuring smile. "Well, that was eventful," he remarked, his voice surprisingly calm considering the circumstances. "Look," Zuru called from behind, holding a familiar green form. Brock turned his attention to Zeru's excited exclamation, and his eyes widened slightly in surprise as he saw the small dark green puppy in Zeru's arms. It was the same massive hound that had accompanied them, but now it had transformed into a much smaller, puppy-sized version of itself. It was adorable in its own way, with its floppy ears and dark green fur, a stark contrast to the intimidating creature it had been. Image here, greater than. Ava and Wanda couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of the hound's transformation. It was a remarkable display of its abilities, and it added a touch of lightheartedness to their otherwise intense situation. Brock chuckled as well, shaking his head in amazement. "Looks like he's got a few tricks up his sleeve," Ava commented with a grin, her earlier unease replaced by amusement. Wanda leaned over to gently pet the transformed puppy, her scarlet eyes filled with warmth. "You're quite the impressive mutt, aren't you?" The puppy wagged its tail happily, clearly enjoying the attention and praise. It seemed to have taken a liking to its new companions. With the danger behind them, the tension that had gripped the group began to ease. They were now free from the immediate threat of the helicarrier's artillery, and the hovercar cruised through the night sky, leaving the chaos of Sokovia behind. As they soared through the night, the moonlight casting a silvery glow on their surroundings, the group couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. They had successfully raided the Hydra research base, secured valuable data and resources, and even obtained a new ally in Wanda Maximoff, whose powers had proved to be a formidable asset. The hound, now comfortably curled up in Zeru's lap as a small puppy, seemed to have adopted them as its new pack. It rested its head on Zeru's leg, its eyes closing in contentment. Brock glanced at his companions and spoke, his tone serious but filled with determination. "We've dealt Hydra a significant blow today, but we can't let our guard down. We'll need to analyze the data and spoils we've secured and continue to stay one step ahead of those that might have survived." Ava nodded in agreement. "Agreed. I imagine that if any of them made it out of the bombardment alive, they won't rest until they've found out who it was that turned their own plan against them." Wanda, who had been quiet for most of the journey, spoke up. If you'll have me, I'd like to help you with that." She had been dreading the thought of being forced to return to her home, especially now that the only person who had loved her was gone. Bitter memories of the life she had once known were hard to escape. But if she stuck with these people, she knew she could start fresh. Even if it was not in the place where she'd spent her entire life. "Of course we'll have you, we can always use more hands," Brock declared with a broad smile. "Welcome to the team, Wanda." Wanda smiled back at him gratefully. "Thank you." As the hovercar continued its flight through the night sky, the group settled into a determined silence. They knew that their fight against Hydra was far from over, and now that the world was in chaos due to their actions, they would need to find a way to navigate the treacherous path ahead. The stolen Hydra resources will be helpful, and now with Wanda's powers, the mysterious hound, and their combined skills and abilities, they were now a powerful force to be reckoned with. The hovercar glided through the night sky, carrying its newfound team away from the chaos of Sokovia and toward an uncertain future. The moonlight bathed them in its gentle glow, casting long shadows that danced across their faces. Ava couldn't help but steal a glance at Brock as he focused on piloting the vehicle. His rugged features were set in determination, and his eyes, which had seen more than their fair share of battles, held a glimmer of hope. She knew that behind that tough exterior was a leader who actually cared about the people he fought alongside. Beside her, Wanda leaned back in her seat, her scarlet eyes gazing out at the night sky. She had left behind a painful past, and now she was embracing a new beginning with this group of unlikely allies. Her powers held immense potential, and she was eager to finally be able to learn how to use them properly on her own terms. Zuru, with the transformed hound resting peacefully in his lap, couldn't contain his excitement. He had always been drawn to the mysteries of the world, and now he was a part of something extraordinary. His curiosity burned brighter than ever as he thought about the adventures that lay ahead. Together, they rode into the darkness, their journey illuminated by the moon and the stars. The night sky stretched out before them, a vast canvas of endless possibilities. As they headed home, they knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but they were determined to face it together, an unstoppable force ready to trample anyone who stood in their way. 2014. Hell's Kitchen, New York. Warehouse District. A few days after the helicarrier's bombardment. Omniscient POV. Brock sat in the makeshift command center they had set up on the first level of the two-story warehouse in Hell's Kitchen. The room was dimly lit by a few scattered lamps, casting long shadows on the makeshift desks covered in maps, computers, and various pieces of high-tech equipment. The walls were lined with screens, each displaying different news channels from around the world. His fingers flipped through the channels, each showing images of devastation and chaos. News anchors with somber expressions recounted the catastrophic events that had unfolded, detailing the destruction wrought by the helicarriers as they unleashed their deadly firepower on major cities across the globe. The reports spoke of countless lives lost, infrastructure in ruins, and a world left in shock and mourning. Governments from around the world are in a state of emergency, one anchor stated, their voice filled with gravitas. The coordinated attack by the helicarriers, allegedly orchestrated by the terrorist organization now known as Hydra, has sent shockwaves through the international community. Brock's brows furrowed as he continued to channel surf, switching between news reports from different countries. It was evident that the world was in turmoil, with nations grappling to respond to the unprecedented crisis. Many governments had joined forces to track down and apprehend those responsible for the attack, with Hydra at the top of their list. With a heavy sigh, Brock turned off the screens, plunging the room into temporary darkness before the overhead lights flashed on again. Ava, Wanda, and Zuru, who were sitting around him at the small table, looked at him expectantly. "So, what's our next move?" Ava asked, her voice carrying a weight of anticipation. Brock leaned back in his chair, the small green dog in his lap shifting to find a comfortable position. He absent-mindedly stroked the creature's fur as he considered their options. The world had changed drastically in the wake of the helicarrier attack, with the US government deciding to dissolve SHIELD, and the public voicing their opinions about the Avengers' lack of involvement in the incident. The world was starting to second-guess their willingness to put itself in the hands of superheroes, and if they wanted to carve out a place for themselves amidst the chaos they needed to keep moving forward. With every government agency's attention focused on hunting down Hydra operatives, we can't draw too much attention to ourselves trying to eliminate the stragglers who survived the bombardment, Brock replied, his voice decisive. For now, Hydra is done. Those who escaped death will likely go into deep hiding till it's safe to try to regroup and rebuild. Meanwhile, our focus needs to be on consolidating our power in the wake of this disaster. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. We need an intel network, connections with people in places of power, and control over key assets within New York City, Brock explained, his tone measured and thoughtful. This city will be our fortress, the center of our operations. From here, we'll extend our influence both in the criminal underworld and within the political landscape. Ava nodded in agreement. We already have a good start thanks to the data we stole from Hydra. With the hundreds of data files of blackmail and intel we stole from Hydra, we should be able to use it to our advantage and gain leverage over those who might want to do us harm. Brock smiled at Ava's response. Exactly. We have a treasure trove of information at our disposal and we use that to establish ourselves as a force to be reckoned with. Then we start laying the groundwork for the future. He turned his attention to Zuru, who was sitting nearby with a tablet in hand, the screens displaying complex algorithms and data analysis. Zuru, I want you to continue to analyze every bit of data we secured. I don't care how trivial it seems, we need to know it all. Identify key players, potential allies, and any vulnerabilities we can exploit. If we're going to play this game, we need to know every piece that is on the board. Zuru nodded, his eyes still glued to the tablet screen. You got it, boss. I'll leave no bite unturned, he said as he continued typing, delving into the vast amount of information they had collected. Brock then looked at Ava. While Zeru's doing his thing, Ava, I want you to start running reconnaissance on the surrounding territories. Figure out the lay of the land, who the major players are, who controls what, and any potential rivals or allies in the area. Find out everything you can and report back when you've got something. Ava nodded eagerly at his words. Consider it done, she replied with a confident grin. Good, Brock said with a nod. Then let's get to work. The two of them nodded and stood up from the table, heading out to complete their respective tasks. As he passed by Brock, Zuru paused and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small piece of paper, folded neatly, and handed it to Brock. Brock accepted it, looking at Zuru with curiosity. What's this? He asked, unfolding the paper to reveal an address written on it in Zeru's neat handwriting. Zeru's usually enthusiastic and curious demeanor had a touch of seriousness. The location of the person you asked me to look for. Brock's brow furrowed, his curiosity piqued as he examined the address. You found him already. That was quick. Zuru nodded. Yeah, it took some digging, but I managed to track him down. He's been keeping a low profile, but I've cross-referenced the data we found with some of the information you gave me and I'm pretty sure this is where he's currently hiding. Brock studied the address for a moment, his mind racing with possibilities. Good work, Zuru, he said with a hint of gratitude in his voice. Zuru nodded, giving him a childish smile before turning to leave the room, his eyes now fixed on the tablet in his hand. Once Ava and Zuru had left the room, Brock turned his attention to Wanda, who had been notably quiet throughout the meeting. She sat across from him, her gaze steady, her presence serene. You've been awfully quiet, Brock remarked, studying the beautiful young woman closely. Something on your mind? Wanda's scarlet eyes met his, and there was a contemplative expression on her face. She leaned forward, her fingers lightly tracing the surface of the table. Brock, Wanda began in her distinctive Sokovian accent, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Brock regarded her with a raised eyebrow. Ask away. Wanda hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing her words. I've been observing the way you and the others go about your work, and it's clear that you're not like the typical heroes I've seen on TV. You don't shy away from doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Brock's gaze remained steady, awaiting her question. With a deep breath, Wanda continued, I've seen the lengths you're willing to go, the secrets you're willing to keep, and the lines you're willing to cross. My question is simple. Are you all, good people? Brock didn't respond immediately, his eyes studying her closely. There was a hint of amusement in his expression, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of seriousness. He seemed to be considering his words carefully. After a moment of silence, he let out a short, light chuckle, though there was little mirth in it. Good people. No, we're not. Wanda's expression remained unchanged, her calm demeanor unwavering. Brock continued, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, the world doesn't operate in black and white, good and bad. It's a sea of gray, and we're just trying to keep our heads above water. We do what we have to, not because we want to, but because it's necessary. We make choices, some of them tough, some of them unforgivable, but that's the brutal world we live in. Wanda nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She seemed to understand the complexity of their situation, and the moral gray area they navigated. Brock leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Wanda's. In this world, Wanda, you can be a hero, a villain, or something in between. But none of that shit matters at the end of the day. What matters is the choices you make and the reasons behind them. Good and bad are labels that don't fit what we do. We're survivors. We're people who understand that the world is a brutal place, and we adapt to it. We take opportunities when we see them, and we eliminate threats without hesitation. We're not good people. We're not bad people. We're just people. There was a weight to his words, a sense of a harsh reality that they all had to face. They weren't conventional heroes, but they were a team bound by necessity, not by ideals. Wanda met Brock's gaze, her eyes reflecting the scarlet glow of her powers. She seemed to accept his answer, understanding the path they had chosen. Just people, she repeated, her voice soft but resolute. And what about you personally, Brock? Do you consider yourself a good person? Brock arched an eyebrow, the question catching him off guard, but after a moment of contemplation, he gave a straightforward answer. No, I don't think I am. He admitted, his voice surprisingly candid. Wanda, I've done things in my life that I'm not proud of. I've made choices that have brought pain and suffering. I've taken lives, innocent and guilty, and I've crossed lines that can never be uncrossed. He paused, his gaze distant, as if lost in memories he'd rather forget. But even with all the bad shit I've done, I've also saved lives. I've protected those who couldn't protect themselves. I've demolished a powerful organization that threatened to consume the world. Now whether that makes me a good person or not, well, I guess that's for others to decide. Wanda listened to his words, her expression thoughtful. She had seen glimpses of the darkness that lurked within Brock, but she had also witnessed his unwavering determination to make a difference. It was a complex, multifaceted man she was trying to understand. I see, she replied softly, her voice carrying a hint of empathy. You're a man who walks a fine line between light and darkness, doing what you must to survive and protect those you care about. Brock looked at her with slight surprise. Her assessment of him not fully mapping onto the way he saw himself. That's a very charitable impression of me, he remarked, seemingly amused by the notion. Wanda leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips as she locked eyes with the handsome young man across from her. I've seen the way your team works, the camaraderie and loyalty you all seem to share in your own unique way. It's clear you're not in this for the sake of villainy or chaos. There's a purpose, and there's a code you follow, even if it's not one that fits the conventional definitions of good or bad. Brock raised an eyebrow at Wanda's response, his curiosity piqued. She seemed to see something in him and his team that he hadn't fully grasped himself. You really believe that, huh? He asked, his tone tinged with a touch of skepticism. Wanda nodded, her eyes holding a deep understanding of the complexity of their situation. She had her own demons to contend with, and she recognized the same in Brock. If it's any comfort, she said, her voice gentle, I don't really consider myself a good person, either. I've seen the darkness within myself too. The selfishness, the anger, the hate, all of it. She paused, letting out a long breath as if to rid herself of old ghosts. But like you said, it's the choices we make and the reasons behind them that define us. Brock's eyes locked onto Wanda's, and there was a shared understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement of the burdens they carried. As they sat in that dimly lit command center, the weight of their shared experiences and the unspoken truths they had laid bare seemed to hang in the air. Brock and Wanda had both accepted the harsh realities of their lives, the choices they had made, and the dark path they were now walking together. Wanda's empathetic words had shed light on the complexity of their characters, and it was a revelation that went beyond the confines of traditional heroism and villainy. In a world where the line between good and bad was often blurred, they had found a common ground rooted in survival and the desire to protect what they held dear. Brock broke the brief silence that had settled between them with a faint smile, one that carried a hint of gratitude. I guess we're all just a bunch of imperfect fuck-ups trying to do the best we can in a world that doesn't always seem to make sense, he mused, a touch of vulnerability in his words. Wanda returned his smile, her scarlet eyes filled with a sense of connection and understanding. I couldn't have put it better myself. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Sokovia. Hydra Research Base. High above the Sokovian landscape, a Quinjet soared through the skies, heading toward a mysterious destination. Inside the high-tech aircraft, Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, and Falcon sat in tense silence, their expressions determined. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, and their mission weighed on each of them. Sidwell's information that Hydra had a secret supersoldier army waiting to be deployed had led them to this moment, and they were prepared to confront the unknown forces and put a stop to their plans, whatever they might be. Inside the Quinjet, the mood was tense. They had received Sidwell's information before the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this was one of their first missions as an independent team. The Avengers were determined to stop Hydra's nefarious plans, but as they approached the base's last known coordinates, they couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty. All right, team, Captain America spoke with authority, addressing his fellow Avengers. We're approaching the coordinates of the base. Let's be prepared for anything. We don't know what we're walking into. Black Widow's eyes flickered across the control panel as she reviewed the data on their approach. I've got visual on the base's location. Tony, any unusual energy readings? Iron Man, who was piloting the Quinjet, adjusted his heads-up display. Nothing unusual yet, but this place isn't giving off any life signatures, so it could be heavily shielded. We might not detect anything until we're right on top of it. As the Quinjet descended toward the base's location, the Avengers could see the landscape below. What should have been a fortified Hydra research facility was now a scene of devastation. The base lay in ruins, with charred remnants of buildings and scattered debris. What the hell happened here? Falcon exclaimed, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. Black Widow squinted as she observed the wreckage through the Quinjet's window. I don't see any signs of life. Just charred corpses everywhere. Captain America clenched his jaw, a sense of foreboding settling in. This isn't right. There should have been a whole division of super soldiers stationed here. We need to investigate. Iron Man landed the Quinjet near the ruins of the base, and the Avengers disembarked, cautiously moving through the rubble. The charred bodies of what were once Hydra agents lay strewn about, their weapons reduced to melted slag. Looks like they were wiped out, Iron Man commented, his voice filtered through his suit's speakers. Black Widow knelt beside one of the charred bodies, examining it carefully. The burns on this corpse look like they were made post-mortem, she noted, her voice tinged with concern. It's as if they were incinerated after they were already dead. Captain America scanned the area, his shield at the ready. We need to find out who or what did this and why. This could be a bigger threat than we anticipated. Falcon kept a close watch on their surroundings, his wings ready for action. This feels like an ambush, Cap. Maybe we should call for backup. Iron Man accessed his suit's sensors, trying to pick up any unusual readings. I'm not detecting any immediate threats, but this place is giving me the creeps. Captain America's shield was raised, and he walked further into the wreckage, his senses on high alert. We need to find out who did this and why. Something's not adding up. As they ventured deeper into the base's remains, a sense of unease settled over the team. It was clear that this was more than just a battle. This was a massacre. Iron Man's suit began scanning the area, his holographic interface displaying information in real time. Guys, I'm picking up faint energy signatures leading in that direction. He pointed toward the edge of the ruined base. The Avengers followed Iron Man's lead, heading toward the source of the energy readings. It led them to what appeared to be the central chamber of the base, where a small vault-like door had been buried underneath a mountain of debris. With great effort, Captain America and Iron Man managed to lift the large chunks of concrete and metal off the hatch, exposing a dark pathway leading to the underground sections of the base. The Avengers exchanged determined glances as they peered into the dark underground passage. It was evident that whatever had taken place in this Hydra research base went beyond their initial expectations. Captain America's voice was resolute. We're going in. Be ready for anything. The team descended into the underground section of the base, the narrow corridor dimly lit by the soft glow coming from Iron Man's suit. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The corridor branched into multiple directions, leading to various chambers and storage areas. Each room they entered revealed more of the same: broken equipment, lifeless bodies, and an eerie silence that weighed heavily on them. As they traveled deeper into the base, they couldn't shake the disturbing sight of more torn-apart corpses, all of whom seemed to be clad in the same standard Black Hydra uniform. It was a gruesome scene that defied explanation. It looks like the Hulk went on a rampage down here, Tony couldn't help but comment, his voice tinged with a mix of shock and dark humor. I've never seen anything like this, Falcon muttered as they moved through the grim and silent catacombs of the base. Captain America shared his sentiment. This was supposed to be a hidden stronghold for HYDRA's whole army. What could have possibly caused this level of destruction? They had reached a large, long chamber that looked like a giant freezer with several thick metal doors covering its walls. The inside of the chamber was lined with row after row of glass holding cells containing dozens upon dozens of deformed, mutated corpses lying in pools of congealed blood. Each of them wore the same dirty gray prisoner uniform. My God, Captain America gasped, unable to hide his horror. What the hell happened down here? Iron Man touched the hollow projector built into his helmet. Some sort of enhanced supersoldier experiments gone wrong. Looks like they were all exposed to some kind of powerful toxin. My scans show this entire chamber has been saturated with the same substance that's in their bodies. The Avengers stood silently in the chamber, transfixed by the grisly sight of the dead mutated prisoners filling the holding cells. Their faces were twisted in agony, their bodies ravaged and disfigured with obvious signs of genetic experimentation. This is revolting, Iron Man declared, his voice laced with disgust. Whoever did this was a monster. Each of the Avengers' faces bore expressions of horror as they took in the macabre scene. Let's keep searching, Captain America ordered, turning away from the chamber of death. There may be other survivors down here. We need to find them and figure out what happened here. The Avengers continued their grim exploration of the underground base, their senses heightened as they searched for any signs of life or clues about what had transpired. The oppressive silence weighed on them, and the unsettling sights they had encountered lingered in their minds. As they moved deeper into the base, they came across a control room filled with cracked screens and slightly damaged equipment. Iron Man, with his suit's advanced technology, started interfacing with the computers, attempting to access the base's data and surveillance footage. "Let's see if we can find any records of what took place here," Iron Man said, inserting an attachment into the console. Captain America remained vigilant, his shield raised, ready for any potential threats. Black Widow and Falcon watched the entrances to the control room, ensuring that they wouldn't be caught off guard. The computer screens soon flickered to life, revealing a complex array of data and surveillance feeds. Iron Man's gloved fingers danced across the keyboard as he expertly navigated the compromised system. He accessed files and ran searches to uncover the truth behind the base's fall. For a moment, it appeared as though they might gain insight into what had transpired. But as Iron Man delved deeper into the system, his expression shifted from anticipation to consternation. "Tony, what do you see?" Captain America inquired, his voice taut with concern. Iron Man didn't respond immediately, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He continued to type furiously, but as the seconds ticked by, the gravity of the situation became apparent and his shoulders slumped slightly. "Shit," Iron Man cursed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It seems that the whole surveillance system has been wiped. Completely. Every piece of data, every record, gone." Black Widow's brow furrowed. "I mean that shouldn't be a problem for you, right?" Iron Man shook his head, his face twisted into frustration under the faceplate of his suit. "That's just it. The level of sophistication in this data erasure is beyond anything I've ever seen. It's like they didn't just wipe the system, they completely obliterated it. I can't retrieve a single byte of data." The weight of Iron Man's words settled heavily in the room. The wiped surveillance system left them with no immediate answers, and the horror of the base's state remained a mystery. Who could have pulled something like this off? Falcon wondered aloud, his voice filled with a mix of dread and intrigue. Captain America's eyes narrowed in thought. "This level of destruction, this isn't a standard military operation. We might be dealing with someone even more dangerous than Hydra. The large-scale massacre and the data wipe. It's as if someone wanted to erase all evidence of what was even here, leave no trace behind." Black Widow commented. Captain America's shield was at the ready as he addressed the team, his voice resolute. "We're probably not going to find any answers here, not now. Our priority is to search for any survivors and get them out of here." Iron Man disconnected from the computer, his expression still marked with frustration. "I'll keep scanning for life signs. Hopefully, we'll get lucky and find someone." The Avengers left the control room and continued their search through the remaining corridors of the base, their weapons and senses on high alert. Despite the unsettling discoveries they had made, they were determined to complete their mission and find any survivors who might shed light on the horrors that had taken place. As they ventured deeper into the underground base, they couldn't shake the sense that they might be facing a threat even more dangerous than Hydra. All of them were wondering what had they stumbled into, and who could have orchestrated such a devastating assault. Manhattan, New York City. High-rise apartments building. The following night. Brock POV. In the heart of New York, the city that never sleeps, the metropolis was alive with the glow of streetlights, the hum of traffic, and the sounds of the urban jungle. It was a city of dreams, ambition, and relentless energy, where towering skyscrapers seemed to scrape the heavens. In one of the high-rise apartment buildings that formed the city's iconic skyline, I sat at the head of a large glass table, a crystal glass of dark-colored liquor in my hand. The city's skyline twinkled beyond the large windows, casting a glittering reflection on the polished surface of the expensive tabletop. I surveyed the bustling cityscape below as I sat by myself in the dark penthouse suite, sipping my drink. My eyes scanned the streets, taking in the bustle of people passing by like ants beneath a magnifying glass. New Yorkers were always moving, always busy, always trying to make their mark and carve a name for themselves. They worked hard and played harder, living life in the fast lane. Looking around, it was easy to see why so many young people decided to take the leap and come to the Big Apple. There were endless possibilities, opportunities, and ways to build your own empire. This was doubled if you take into account how big of a role this city played in most of the significant events of this universe. From the forming of the Avengers to the chaos brought about by Thanos' genocide, there was always something happening in New York. That's the main reason I wanted to make this city mine. Sure, I had enough money and power to move somewhere comfortable and safe. Away from the constant barrage of superheroes and supervillains battling for supremacy. But that wasn't me. That's not the kind of life I wanted to live. And I knew that if I stayed idle for too long, eventually, I would lose my edge. I needed to keep fighting, keep growing in power, keep destroying. Taking another sip, I placed the half-empty glass down onto the table and glanced at my watch, noting the time just as the door to the dark apartment quietly swung open, and an old, middle-aged man with graying short-cropped hair and a salt and pepper beard entered, carrying 2 bags of groceries in his well-toned arms. The man didn't notice me sitting in the darkness until he moved further into the apartment, his arms filled with the weight of the groceries. His tired sigh escaped his lips as he softly kicked the door closed behind him, carefully setting the bags down on the glass table in the living room. As he reached for the light switch to illuminate the apartment, my voice suddenly cut through the silence, causing him to pause. "Nice place," I call out in a cold, chilling tone. The man's hand tensed on the light switch, flicking it on as he turned slowly to face the source of the voice. His eyes widened in surprise, and he instinctively reached for the concealed blade beneath his jacket. I leaned forward, the dim light revealing a faint smile playing on my lips as I looked at the man and grabbed my drink from the table. "No need for all that," I say as I take another sip from the glass. The man, still cautious, slowly withdrew his hand from his concealed weapon but didn't let his guard down completely. "What are you doing here?" he demanded warily, and I could see in his eyes that he was on edge. He was ready to fight, to defend himself if necessary. "Can't a son visit his father?" I replied sarcastically. Anthony Masters, a.k.a. Taskmaster, looked at me with a mixture of emotions, his eyes filled with a combination of surprise, disbelief, and a hint of anger. The tension in the room was palpable as he tried to assess the situation of the unexpected presence of his foster son. The years had been unkind to him, etching lines and weariness into his face. His eyes, though, still held a glint of the intensity and focus that had made him a feared adversary in his prime. He folded his arms across his chest, sizing me up carefully. "I never expected to see you ever again," he said as I watched him trying to discreetly inch toward one of the many weapons hidden near the cabinets. "How'd you find me?" Ignoring his question and obvious movements, I leaned back in my chair, still sipping my drink as the tension rose in the air between us. "You know, I've been traveling a lot lately, Tony," I said, using the familiar nickname that I used when I was a kid. "Seeing the sights, enjoying the world. But, of course, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to visit your old dad." Taskmaster's brows furrowed, his expression guarded. "You and I both know I'm not your fucking dad, so just get to the damn point, or you here to try and kill me?" I put down my glass and leaned forward, my gaze locking onto his. We stared each other down for a moment, neither showing any fear or uncertainty. Finally, I broke the stalemate, letting out a small laugh as I stood from the table with my drink in hand and casually walked over to the large windows to look out at the city below. "Where's Jean?" I asked in a casual tone, my back turned to the older man. "She's usually attached to your hip," surprised I didn't run into her when I broke in. There was a tense silence as I waited for an answer, the only sound coming from Taskmaster's soft footsteps as he took advantage of my distraction to quickly move toward the location where his weapons were kept. "She left about a few years back," he answered curtly, and I heard the shuffling of metal as he finally gripped the weapon he was looking for in his hands. "Said some bullshit about wanting to live her own life. Didn't even give me the chance to tell her how much I." Bang! Asterisk. A gunshot echoed through the penthouse, causing a sharp, ringing sensation in the air. The bullet, aimed straight at the back of my head, struck its target, but instead of penetrating my skull on impact, it just dropped harmlessly to the hardwood floor with a clatter, not even leaving a mark. I turned my head slightly as the bullet bounced off the back of my head, the impact feeling like a fly buzzing against my skin. Still facing the window, I watched as Taskmaster's eyes widened in shock and disbelief in the reflection of the glass. He held a gun pointed at me, the large .45 calories trembling slightly in his grip. What the hell are you? He questioned softly, his voice wavered with uncertainty. With a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, I turned to face him. Drink still in hand and my expression unfazed as I locked eyes with Taskmaster, who was staring at me in disbelief. A sardonic smile played on my lips as I approached him, the tension in the room palpable. "Let's just say I'm not the same helpless little boy you raised," I replied in a calm, almost eerie voice as I gestured toward the flattened remnants of the bullet that had fallen harmlessly to the floor. Taskmaster's eyes darted between me and the flattened bullet, his mind racing as he tried to process the impossible situation. I knew you would grow up to become strong, but," he muttered, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "But this is something else. What the hell did they do to you?" My foster father's voice held a tinge of fear. It was a rare sight to see him so off balance, and it filled me with a strange sense of satisfaction. The memories of a childhood filled with brutal training, fear, and anger were etched deeply into my psyche, but now, things have changed. "Is that fear I hear in your voice?" I asked as I took another sip of my drink and leaned against the sleek, modern countertop, my eyes never leaving his. "Oh, come on, Tony. Don't be such a pussy." For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of genuine anger cross his face at my words, but it disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. I could tell my remark annoyed him, and couldn't help but give him a derisive smirk as I took another sip of my drink. "Remember all the fun times we had, Tony?" I quipped, a touch of mockery filling my voice. "The lessons you put me through. Those brutal training sessions and near-death experiences. Those were the good old days, weren't they?" Taskmaster clenched his jaw, and I saw as the guilt of his past actions weighed heavily on him. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from the stoic and hardened warrior I used to see him as. "Listen, I had my reasons," he began, his voice low and conflicted. "I didn't have a choice. You have to understand, Hydra." But I interrupted him with a bitter laugh, the cold smirk still present on my face. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You made me into what I am today. You forged me through blood, sweat, and tears. And look at me now, Tony. I've evolved beyond your wildest expectations. I'm something more, something different," I said as I advanced toward him, closing the distance between us. He kept his weapon trained on me, though his resolve seemed to waver. "You know what, Tony?" I said, my voice laced with a dark amusement. "I used to hate you for what you did to me. I used to despise every second of my miserable childhood. But now, I'm grateful. You made me stronger, faster, more resilient. You honed my tactical skills and turned me into a weapon. And now, I'm going to use everything you taught me to carve out my own path in this fucked up world." The tension in the room grew, thick as a fog, as Taskmaster grappled with the incomprehensible transformation that I had undergone. "Kill me if you want," he said, his voice a mixture of resignation and defiance. "But it won't change the past, and it won't make you anything more than what you already are. A broken orphan still looking for someone to coddle him." I let out a low chuckle, the sound cold and devoid of any warmth as I closed the gap between us, my movements almost leisurely. My foster father held his ground, his finger tensed on the trigger of the .45 calories still pointed at me, even though he was fully aware that his weapon had proven useless moments ago. Says the sad lonely old man living as a shell of his former self. I continued, my smile growing wider as I stepped closer to him. The room seemed to grow even smaller as the tension escalated, and I could see the emotions warring within Taskmaster. Regret, guilt, anger, and fear all danced behind his eyes. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and casually plucked the gun from his trembling hand, crushing it like a soda can as if it were nothing more than a child's toy. I let the mangled metal fall to the floor. "You know, there were times when I was a kid that I did think of all of us as a family," I said, my tone no longer mocking but strangely sincere. "That in your own messed up way, you were trying to take care of us." Taskmaster looked at me with complicated eyes, his lips parting slightly to speak as I suddenly grabbed him by the throat and effortlessly lifted him off the ground, his feet dangling in the air. He struggled and gasped for air, but he was helpless in my powerful grip. The shock on his face deepened, realizing just how outmatched he really was. My foster father's eyes met mine, a complex mixture of emotions flickering within. Fear, regret, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. I carried him to the large windows, the city lights casting distorted shadows on his face. "Goodbye, Tony," I said softly as I flung him through the reinforced glass, and his body tumbled through the night air, hurtling toward the bustling city below. The glass shattered into a cascade of shards as Taskmaster's body plummeted toward the ground, his scream echoing through the night air. The world outside disappeared as he descended into the darkness. And then, with a sickening thud, his body met the unforgiving concrete below. I stood by the shattered window, looking down at the twisted form of my foster father, now nothing more than a bloody, mush puddle splattered on the pavement. I didn't feel any remorse, only a strange sense of closure. Raising my almost empty glass to the city below, I offered a toast, my voice a cold whisper in the darkness. "Here's to new beginnings," I muttered, emptying the glass and tossing it out into the night sky and watching it plummet into the city abyss, mingling with the shattered remnants of my past. Turning away from the shattered window, I contemplated the road ahead of me. I had tied up most of the loose ends of my past. Now was the time to embrace the future, one where I was the one in control, where my power was unmatched, and where I would carve my own kingdom to rule. I'd been a pawn for too long, now, it was time to play the game like a king. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.